The last thing he remembered was dying, and I want you to understand that it was a good death as far as deaths go. There was no enemy this time, no final battle, no last desperate transformation, no world hanging in the balance. There was just an old man lying down at the end of a very long life, his body finally worn out from a lifetime of pushing past every limit the universe ever set in front of him. His friends had grown old, his family had grown up, and he closed his eyes with a small, tired, satisfied smile on his face, the smile of someone who had given everything he had and had nothing left to regret. And then there was nothing, no bright tunnel of light, no long gold road stretching off into the clouds, no giant red gatekeeper sitting behind a desk, stamping souls and sending them on their way. For the strongest warrior the universe had ever known, the man who had died before and walked through the next world like it was his second home, there was simply, suddenly, nothing at all. A deep and total dark, soft and quiet and endless, with no edges and no time. And then, out of that nothing, came a sound. It was small at first. So small he almost missed it. A steady, rhythmic, pulsing little sound somewhere underneath everything. A heartbeat, slow and yet somehow racing at the same time. Far too fast to be calm and far too close to be anyone else's. He listened to it the way you might listen to a noise in the dark when you are half asleep, curious and a little afraid, not yet sure if you are dreaming. And the longer he listened, the more a strange and impossible understanding began to creep over him. That heartbeat was his own, and it was beating inside a body that felt wrong, a body that felt tiny. He tried to open his eyes, and even that was a struggle, like lifting a weight he had never had to lift before. When he finally managed it, the whole world was a smeared blur of red. A red sky, harsh and burning, the kind of red that does not belong over anywhere peaceful. He tried to focus on it and could not. He tried to lift his head, and his neck would not hold it. He tried to raise his arms, to push himself up the way he had pushed himself up 1,000 times off 1,000 battlefields, and his arms barely twitched at his sides, weak and clumsy and useless. And then, when the panic started to rise in him and he opened his mouth to demand to know where he was, the only sound that came out was a thin, high, helpless little wail. The cry of a newborn baby, because that is exactly what he was now. Let that settle for a second, because it is one of the wildest setups in any story I ever told you. Goku. The man who traded blows with gods, the man who turned golden and shook the heavens, the strongest fighter in all of creation. He had just been born, all over again. From scratch. A brand new baby, fresh into the world, with absolutely none of the strength he had spent a lifetime earning, and of all the places in all the endless reaches of the cosmos that a soul like that could have opened its eyes, he had opened them in the single worst place imaginable. He had been born on planet Vegeta. Now, if you know Dragon Ball, you just felt your stomach drop straight through the floor, the very same way his did the moment he understood. And if you do not know why that is a catastrophe, stay right here with me, because this one fact is the engine of this entire story, and it is worth slowing all the way down for. Planet Vegeta was the homeworld of the Saiyans. And the Saiyans were not gentle people. They were a warrior race, proud and brutal and built for battle, a species that conquered other worlds for a living and went to sleep at night without losing a moment of rest over it. They lived to fight. They lived to grow stronger. And every single one of them, from the lowest foot soldier to the king himself, answered to one being at the very top of it all. A small, pale, smiling creature with a voice like silk and a heart like ice. The most powerful being in the entire universe. The emperor of everything. Frieza. And here is the part that turns a miracle of rebirth into an absolute nightmare. Goku had not been born on some ordinary quiet day in the long history of his people. He had been born in the final days, the last few sunsets this planet would ever see. Because very, very soon, within a matter of days, Frieza was going to look down from his throne, in orbit, at this planet full of warriors who were slowly, quietly, generation by generation, growing a little too strong for his comfort. And he was going to make a decision. He was going to decide that the safest thing to do, the simplest thing to do, was to erase them, all of them. He would raise a single finger. He would gather a ball of burning energy the size of a small sun, and he would drop it, and planet Vegeta, and very nearly every Saiyan who had ever lived, would simply stop existing. And Goku knew it. That, right there, was the true horror of his situation. He was not a confused, blank, ordinary baby. He remembered everything. Every single thing. His whole life, from the boy on the mountain to the old man on the deathbed. Every friend, every fight, every loss, every transformation, every enemy he had ever stood against. He had the complete mind of the greatest warrior who had ever lived, packed inside the skull of an infant. He knew exactly what was coming. He knew roughly when, and he knew, with the certainty of memory, a dozen different ways he could have stopped almost any threat the universe could throw at him. And he was trapped inside the body of a baby who could not even hold up his own head. I really need you to sit inside that feeling for a moment, because it is the most important feeling in the whole first chapter of this story. Imagine being the one person in the entire world who can see the disaster coming. Imagine knowing, down to your bones, that everyone around you is going to die, and that you have the knowledge to save them, and then opening your mouth to scream the warning, and having nothing come out but the soft, meaningless babble of an infant. Imagine all of that power, all of that knowing, locked behind a body that cannot run, cannot speak, cannot even point. That is where our hero begins this story. Not strong, not in control, not one step ahead. Helpless, completely, totally, agonizingly helpless. It is the exact opposite of everything Goku had ever been, and the universe handed it to him on his very first day. And then, through the red blur and the rising panic, two faces leaned down over him. The first was a woman. And the moment he saw her, something in him went still. She had kind eyes, warm and a little tired, and dark, messy hair, and a soft, gentle smile that honestly looked completely out of place on a planet as hard and cold as this one. She gathered him up against her chest and made those quiet, wordless, soothing sounds that mothers make in every corner of the galaxy, in every language and no language at all. And underneath all the fear and the noise in his mind, Goku understood, instantly and without a single doubt, who she was. This was his mother, and here is the part that makes it ache. In his first life, the long, full, complete life he had already lived, all the way to the end, Goku had never known her. Not once. He had never seen her face. He had never heard her voice. He had grown up an orphan on a faraway world, raised by a kind old stranger, and he had gone his entire life without the faintest idea that this woman had ever existed. Her name was Jean. She was gentle and she was warm, and in the story he remembered, she was nothing but a name and an absence. And now here she was, holding him, alive and real and close enough to feel her heartbeat through her armor. The second face was harder. It belonged to a man. A Saiyan, broad-shouldered and battle-worn, with wild black hair that stood up in sharp, untamed spikes, and a deep scar carved across one cheek, and a pair of eyes that had clearly seen 1,000 battlefields and fully expected to see 1,000 more. He looked down at the small bundle in Jean's arms, with a guarded, distant, slightly uncomfortable expression, the look of a hardened soldier who does not quite know what to do with something this small and this fragile. This was Bardock, a low-class Saiyan warrior, the kind who fought for scraps and survived on instinct and nothing else. And this was his father. And for Goku, looking up at that scarred face with the memories of a grown man behind his newborn eyes, this one hit even harder than the first. Because in his old life, the only thing Goku had ever known about his father was a name. He had never had a single moment with the man. Not one. And now here that man stood, close enough to touch, looking down at him with those wary, weary eyes, having no idea, none at all, that the strange child in front of him already loved him for a lifetime he could not remember ever having. But there was no time. That was the cruelty of it all. There was no time to feel any of this, no time to grieve, no time to wonder at the impossible gift of seeing his parents alive, because the clock had already started ticking, and he was the only one in the entire universe who could hear it. So, even as his tiny heart was breaking, the mind of the greatest warrior alive was already at work, racing, calculating, doing the kind of cold and desperate math that no baby should ever be able to do. He searched his memory. He listened to the way the warriors spoke in the staging grounds outside. He noted the position of Frieza's fleet in the red sky. He counted the days, and the answer he came back with turned his blood to ice days. He had days, maybe less, and so, on his very first day of life, less than a single day old, a newborn baby made himself a solemn and impossible promise. He was going to change it. He was going to save them. He had failed to even know these people in his first life, and he was not. He refused to lose them in this one before he had so much as begun. He would warn them. He would get them off this doomed rock. He would do the one single thing that no version of history, in any telling, had ever managed to do. He would beat the clock. There was just one very small, very enormous problem. He could not talk. And what followed over those first frantic, desperate hours would honestly be almost funny if it were not so painful to sit and watch. Because Goku tried. He tried everything. He gathered all his focus, all that mountain of knowledge and will, and he tried to form a single word, just one, anything that might make them understand. And what came out was babble. Wet, formless, meaningless, baby babble. He tried to lift his arm and point at the sky, point at the door, point at anything, and his arm simply flopped back down against him, refusing every command he gave it. He tried, in pure desperation, to stare as hard and as meaningfully as he possibly could into his father's eyes, to pour the warning across through sheer force of will, the way you might try to make someone understand something across a crowded and noisy room. And Bardock just frowned, decided the strange baby probably had a stomachache, and handed him right back to his mother. Every attempt failed. Every single one of them. And with each failure, the panic inside that tiny body wound a little tighter, climbed a little higher, coiled up like a spring, being pushed and pushed and pushed past the point it was ever built to take. He was screaming on the inside, louder than he had ever screamed in his life, and not one sound of it could reach the outside world. And then, finally, the spring broke. And this, right here, is the exact moment that the entire story turns. So whatever you do not look away. Bardock was leaving. There was a mission waiting for him, a routine job, a quick strike on a distant world called Planet Meat. The kind of mission a low-class soldier got handed all the time and never thought twice about. He had armor to strap on and a small round attack pod to climb into, and he was already halfway out the door, his mind on the work ahead. And he paused just for a second, just for one final glance back at the strange, squalling, oddly intense child that fate had dropped into his life. And in that exact instant, all the fear, all the desperation, all the unbearable, crushing weight of knowledge crammed inside that newborn finally hit its absolute breaking point. And Goku did something that he did not even know he was capable of doing. He pushed, not with his arms. He had nothing in his arms worth the name. He pushed with his mind. A raw, wild, formless, uncontrolled blast of pure thought and pure terror flung out into the room because his body simply had no other way left to scream. And it was not words. He had no words. It was an image. A single, blinding, perfect flash of an image. A red sky tearing itself wide open. A wall of white fire swallowing the whole world. An entire planet dying in the space of a single heartbeat. And it landed. Bardock froze in the doorway. For half a second, no longer, the seasoned, scarred warrior, who feared absolutely nothing, saw something appear inside his own head that had no business being there. He saw his planet burn. He felt, for one impossible instant, the heat of it on his face. And at the very same moment, the small device clipped over his left ear. The Scouter, the little piece of technology that the Saiyans used to measure the fighting strength of any living thing, suddenly gave a sharp, urgent beep. A number flickered across the glowing lens in front of his eye. A power level, spiking, impossibly, out of the only other living creature in the room, out of the newborn baby in Jine's arms. Now, you have to understand exactly what that meant to a Saiyan, because it is everything. These were not a people who trusted feelings. They did not put faith in dreams, or hunches, or strange, unexplained shivers down the spine. They were warriors, practical and cold, and the one thing they trusted above all else was the hard, cold, honest number on the Scouter. The Scouter did not lie. The Scouter did not imagine things. And right now, the Scouter was telling Bardock something that made no sense whatsoever. It was telling him that his infant son, a child not yet a full day old, had just flared, for the briefest of moments, with a flicker of power that an infant could not, should not, ever possess. Slowly, very slowly. Bardock turned back from the doorway. He looked down at the device still glowing in his hand, at the impossible reading. And then he lifted his eyes, and he looked, really looked, into the face of his son. And his son looked back, but not the way a baby looks at the world. Not soft, not unfocused, not new and blank and searching. Goku looked back up at his father with the steady, knowing, ancient, bottomless stare of a being who had lived an entire long life, who had stood at the very summit of existence, and who had crossed the threshold of death itself to arrive in this small body, in this small room under this dying sky. For one long, silent, suspended moment, the warrior and the newborn simply looked at one another, and something passed between them in that look that neither of them could have put into words if they tried. Recognition, a warning, a plea, and something older than all of it. Bardock did not understand it. Not yet, not even close. But every single battle-hardened instinct he owned, every reflex and every hard-won scrap of intuition that had kept him alive across 100 hostile worlds was suddenly screaming the very same thing at him, all at once, in one deafening chorus. Something is wrong, something terrible is coming, and it has something to do with this child. He stood there in that doorway for a long, long time. The pod was waiting. The mission to Planet Meat was waiting. A whole ordinary, predictable, doomed future was sitting patiently just on the other side of that door, the exact same future that had played out 1,000 times in 1,000 versions of this story. All he had to do was walk through it, and then Bardock reached up, switched off his scouter, stepped back inside, and shut the door. He was not going on that mission. He did not know it yet. He could not possibly have known it. But in that one small, simple choice, that single step back across the threshold of his own home, the father of Goku had just done something that had never, not once, happened in any telling of this story. He had reached out and knocked over the very first domino. And every single thing that was about to follow, every life that would be saved and every life that would be lost, every impossible victory and every unbearable goodbye still waiting far down the road, all of it began right here. In a quiet room, under a red and dying sky, with a tired warrior who chose, for reasons he could not explain, to stay. And a baby who remembered the future. And here is how we know, beyond any doubt, that it worked. Because that mission to Planet Meat, the routine little job that Bardock had just walked away from, was a death trap. In the history that Goku remembered, the one that had already happened once before, Bardock and his entire team had flown out to that distant world, and waiting there for them in the dark were Frieza's men. It was an ambush. A deliberate, cold-blooded ambush. Because Frieza had already quietly begun thinning out the strongest Saiyans before the main event, picking off the dangerous ones a squad at a time, so that none of them would be around to cause trouble when the end came. And Bardock's whole crew had been slaughtered there. Every one of them. Bardock himself had only barely crawled away alive. It was one of the saddest, smallest, most pointless footnotes in the entire saga. A good squad, a loyal team, wiped out for nothing, by a master who was about to kill every Saiyan in existence anyway. But this time, Bardock did not go. And because Bardock was the leader of that squad, when he chose to stay behind, his team stayed with him. Which meant that 4 people who, by every law of the story, were supposed to be dead and cold by the end of that day, were suddenly, impossibly, still alive. There was Tora, Bardock's closest friend in all the world, the calm and steady one, the soldier who always seemed to be thinking 2 or 3 moves ahead of everyone else around him. There was Fasha, the only woman on the team, quick and sharp and utterly without fear. And there were the 2 big, broad, brawling bruisers, Borgos and Shugesh, the muscle, the kind of fighters who solved most problems by hitting them very hard. In the old timeline, all 4 of them died on Planet Meat, far from home, for no reason at all. In this one, they were back at base, alive and breathing and thoroughly annoyed, grumbling to each other about a perfectly good mission getting canceled at the last second, with absolutely no idea on this world or any other how close they had just come to the end of everything. And little Goku noticed. Lying there in his mother's arms, he ran the calculation again, checking the cold facts of his memory against the warm, impossible reality unfolding right in front of him, and the realization stopped him completely. By his count, by everything he knew, Bardock's crew should already be gone. They should have died that day. And yet here they were, walking around, arguing, alive, which could only mean one single thing: it had worked. The future had already moved. He had pushed against the great unchangeable weight of history exactly one time, with nothing but a single desperate flash of a thought, and history had actually measurably bent. For the first time since he had opened his eyes in this tiny body under that red sky, Goku felt something other than fear, something he badly needed. He felt hope, but he was getting ahead of himself, and he knew it. Because keeping 4 soldiers alive was one thing. Saving a whole planet was something else entirely. And to even attempt that, he needed his parents to do more than simply suspect that their baby was strange. He needed them to truly, completely understand what was coming. He needed them to believe him, so he kept pushing. Over the next day, and the next, strange things kept happening in that little home. Jine would be holding her son, humming softly to him, lost in the quiet of an ordinary moment, and out of nowhere a picture would flash across her mind that did not belong to her. A burning sky, a wave of white fire rolling over everything. And underneath it all, a single name, rising up out of her like a cold hand closing around her heart. Frieza. She would gasp and clutch the baby a little tighter and look down at him, and the baby would be staring right back up at her, calm and quiet and patient, almost as if he were watching to see whether the message had gotten through this time. And every single time it happened, Bardock Scouter, sitting forgotten on the table across the room, would give a small, telltale beep, a flicker of power. Coming, again, from the child. And of the 2 of them, Jean was the one who believed it first. And that makes complete sense, if you stop and think about it. Bardock was a soldier. He had spent his entire life looking outward, at enemies, at threats, at numbers and missions, and the next fight on the horizon. But Jeannie spent her time looking at her son. She was the one who was actually, truly paying attention to him, hour by hour, the way only a mother does. So she was the first to stop telling herself that it was all nothing, just nerves, just a strange child, and to start whispering out loud the thing she had really started to believe, that there was something inside her baby boy that was far, far older than a baby had any right to be. Bardock took longer, because Bardock was not a man who turned his whole world upside down over a feeling. He needed proof. Real proof, the kind you could not argue with. So one night, after Jain had finally drifted off to sleep, he sat himself down on the floor in front of his strange son, and he looked the child dead in the eyes, and inside his own head, as clearly and as deliberately as he possibly could, he asked a question. He thought, with everything he had, show me. Show me what you keep trying to tell me, all of it, right now. And Goku, who had been waiting and praying for this exact moment, gave him everything. It was not a fragment this time. It was not a single flash. It was the whole thing, start to finish, poured directly from one mind into another. Bardock saw Frieza, floating high up there in the cold dark above the planet, that small, cruel smile resting on his lips. He saw him lift a single, lazy finger. He saw a tiny spark of light appear at its tip, and then grow and grow, swelling larger and larger until it hung over the heads of every living Saiyan like a second sun, glowing a terrible orange and red. And then he saw it fall. He felt the unbearable heat of it. He watched his entire world, the staging grounds, the streets, the people, the sky itself, crack apart and vanish in one single, silent, total flash of white. And here is the detail that finally broke the warrior down. Bardock had never seen that attack. Not once. It was not something he had heard about, or imagined, or could possibly have dreamed up on his own. But the baby showed it to him in perfect, flawless detail, down to the smallest spark and the smallest shadow, like a memory of something that had genuinely, actually happened. Because, for Goku, it had. When the vision finally released him, Bardock was on his hands and knees on the floor, breathing hard and ragged, soaked through with cold sweat, his whole body shaking. And when he at last lifted his head and looked up at his son, he was not looking at a baby anymore. He was looking at a warning. And now, you might expect a Saiyan to do exactly what Saiyans always do in a moment like this. Get angry. Power up. Find the enemy and go down swinging. And honestly, that is precisely what Bardock did the first time around, in the history that Goku remembered. He learned the truth. He filled up with helpless rage. And he flew straight up into the sky to face Frieza all on his own, one low-class soldier against the Emperor of the Universe. And he died for it. A single brave, furious, utterly pointless charge into the dark. But this Bardock had things the old one never did. He had proof he could not deny, burned into his own mind. He had a crew that was still alive, 4 warriors who should have been dead. And he had a son who, somehow, impossibly, knew the future. And maybe, just maybe, all of that together was enough to make a tired, stubborn old soldier think differently, for once in his life. Because Bardock looked at the impossible odds in front of him, and instead of asking the question that had killed him before, instead of asking, how do I fight this, he asked a smarter one, a better one, the only one that had any hope at all. How do I get my family off this planet before it happens? And that was the moment everything truly shifted. Not a battle, not a last stand, an escape. Get out, get away, and take as many people with you as you possibly can. He pulled Jain close. He called for Tora, the one man he trusted with his life. And quietly, in the dark, he told them. He told them that they were not going to die here, that they were going to run, and that they were going to bring others with them, and that they were going to do the one thing that no Saiyan had ever been desperate enough, or humble enough, or wise enough to try. It was a good plan. It was the right plan. It was, very possibly, the only plan in the whole universe that could save a single soul on that doomed world. There was just one enormous problem standing squarely in its path. To save anyone at all, Bardock first had to convince a planet full of the proudest, most stubborn, most battle-drunk warriors in the entire galaxy that the end was truly coming. He had to make them believe a low-class soldier and his strange, silent baby over the god they had all served faithfully for their entire lives. And the Saiyans, as Goku knew far too well, were not exactly in the habit of listening. So, Bardock started with the truth. The honest way, the open way. He went to the staging grounds, the great gathering hall where the Saiyan soldiers drank and bragged and waited around between missions, and he stood up in the middle of all of them, and he told them, plainly and clearly, that Frieza was going to destroy the planet. that it was coming in a matter of days, that their only hope was to run. And they laughed at him. Of course they did. Put yourself in their boots for just a moment. These were the proudest fighters in all of creation. They had spent their entire lives winning, conquering, dominating everything that was ever put in front of them. And here was Bardock, a low-class nobody, not even one of the elites, standing up and telling them that the master they had served for generations was about to wipe them all out, and that the answer, the solution, was to flee like frightened cowards into the night. To a Saiyan, that was not a warning. It was an insult. A few of them chuckled into their drinks. A few told him to go home and sleep it off. A couple got genuinely angry. But not one single warrior in that entire hall believed a single word that came out of his mouth. And this is the thing that Goku understood, deep in his bones, as he watched it all play out exactly, precisely, painfully the way it had the first time. History pushes back. You can change it. Yes, he had already proven that, but it does not want to be changed. It fights you. It strains and pulls to snap itself back into the shape it already knows, the shape it has always been. Bardock warning the Saiyans, and the Saiyans laughing in his face. That had happened before, in the world Goku remembered. Destiny was digging in its heels, trying with all its weight to drag the story back onto its old, familiar, deadly rails. So Goku and Bardock and Jean did the only thing left that they could do. They stopped trying to save everyone out loud, where the whole world could hear them and laugh, and they started, quietly, in the shadows, trying to save the few that they could. They went silent. They went underground. And they got to work. And it turned out that Jean, gentle, warm, unremarkable Jean, was the perfect person in the universe for this particular job, because nobody ever suspected her of anything. She was not a fighter. She was not important. She was just a soft-spoken mother, moving through the lower districts of the city, the crowded, forgotten neighborhoods where the low-class families lived, the soldiers nobody powerful ever bothered to think about, the parents with small children clinging to their legs. And quietly, carefully, one family at a time, she began to spread the word. Never loudly. Never as some grand announcement that could get back to the wrong ears. Just a whisper, here and there, to the people most likely to listen and least likely to talk. Something is coming. There is a way out. Be ready. Tell no one you cannot trust with your life. Meanwhile, Bardock and his crew took on the harder, more dangerous half of the work. Because to escape a planet, you need ships. Specifically, you need the small, round, single-person attack pods that the Saiyans use to travel between the stars. And you need them fueled and prepped and ready to launch, and you need all of that done without anyone in Frieza's chain of command noticing that pods are quietly going missing from the yards. It was slow, nerve-wracking, deadly work, and the four warriors who carried it out, Tora and Fasha and Borgos and Shugesh, the very same four who were supposed to be dead and gone by now, became the entire backbone of the operation. The crew that Destiny had tried so hard to erase ended up being the only reason that anyone got saved at all. And there is something almost beautiful about that if you let yourself stop and feel it. The lives Goku reached back and saved on a whim, on a single desperate push, became the hands that saved everyone else. And running underneath all of it, guiding every single step, was the baby. And this is honestly one of my favorite ideas in this entire story. So picture it with me. Goku could not walk. He could not talk out loud. He could not lift a finger to help. But he could push images, and now whole thoughts, into the minds of his parents. So he became the planner, the strategist, the general. When Bardock was not sure which travel routes were safe, Goku showed him, flashing crystal-clear pictures of Frieza's patrol patterns, the gaps in the watch, the precise windows of time when the skies above would be clear of scouts. When Jine was uncertain which family to trust and which to quietly pass by, Goku nudged her, one way or the other, with the cold accuracy of a man who remembered how people behaved when the world was ending. He was running an entire planetary evacuation from inside a crib, using two grown adults as his hands and his voice, a commander the size of a loaf of bread quietly steering dozens and dozens of lives toward the faint hope of safety. And for a little while, a precious little while, it actually felt like it might work. Pods were being readied. Families were being warned. A plan was coming together in the dark. There was, for the first time, a real and genuine chance. And then they hit the wall. The hard wall. The one wall that there was no clever way around, no patrol to dodge, no route to reroute. And this is the moment, my friends, that this story stops being a thrilling adventure and starts quietly to break your heart. The math did not work. There were tens of thousands of Saiyans living on that planet. Tens of thousands. And there were only so many pods. A handful. A precious, pitiful handful, enough for a few dozen souls, maybe, if they packed them in tight and prayed. Goku could plan all he wanted. He could dodge every single patrol and time every single launch to the second and make not one mistake. And it would not change the simple, brutal, immovable arithmetic of it. They could not save everyone. They could not save most. They could not even save a fraction worth naming. They could save a tiny, tiny sliver of their entire people, and every single soul who did not fit into one of those few pods was going to die, which meant that somebody had to choose who lived. Sit with how monstrous that is, just for a moment, because the story does. Picture Giant going door to door through those crowded districts, looking into the frightened, hopeful faces of parents, clutching their children, knowing the whole time that for every single family she could fit onto a pod, there were 100 more she would have to look at, and smile at, and walk right past. Picture Bardock, a soldier, a man used to hard choices, sitting down to decide which lives were worth a seat and which were not, knowing that every name he wrote on the list was another name he was leaving off it. And picture Goku, the mind of a hero, the man who had spent his entire first life saving absolutely everybody, who never once, not ever, left a single person behind if there was any way on any world to avoid it. Now forced, as a helpless infant, to accept the one thing he hated more than anything else in all of existence, that he was going to lose people, so many people, and that there was nothing that his knowledge or his memories or his stolen glimpse of the future could do about it. This, right here, is the beating heart of this entire series, so let me say it as plainly and as clearly as I possibly can. Goku was not failing because he was weak. He had the mind of the strongest being who had ever lived. He was failing because no amount of strength, none, can put you in two places at once. Because you cannot, no matter who you are, outrun a clock that has already run out. Saving people, it turns out, was never really about power at all. It was about time, and they were almost completely out of it. So they pushed harder, they worked faster, they barely slept. They told themselves, over and over, that every single seat filled was a victory, that a few dozen lives pulled out of the fire was infinitely better than the absolute zero that history had handed them the first time around. And it was true. It really, genuinely was. But it did not feel like winning. It felt like drowning in slow motion and grabbing hold of whoever happened to float past your hands. And then, with the pods nearly ready, and the plan nearly set, and the family daring, just barely, to believe they might pull it off, Goku felt something change. A wrongness. A flicker in his memory, lining up against the world around him and refusing to match. He reached for the timeline he knew, the schedule he had been counting on, the precious days he was sure they still had. And he found that they were gone. Frieza's ships were moving. Not on the schedule, Goku remembered. Sooner, much sooner, the little head start they had fought and bled and sacrificed to scrape together the few precious extra days that were the entire foundation of their fragile plan was evaporating right in front of them. Frieza was not going to wait for the day Goku expected. The tyrant had grown impatient, or paranoid, or simply bored, and he was coming early. The clock had just sped up, and the family was not ready. And so everything happened at once. The moment those ships began to move, the careful, patient, secret plan they had spent days building in the shadows blew apart and turned into a flat-out, screaming race. There was no more time for caution, no more time for clever routes and perfect timing and dodged patrols. It was now or it was never. Bardock gave the word, and all across the lower districts of the city, the quiet operation they had built in the dark burst suddenly and violently out into the open. Families ran for the hidden pods. Jean was right in the middle of it, out in the open, pulling people forward, calling out names over the rising noise, loading frightened parents and crying children into the small round ships as fast as the hatches could open and seal. The crew worked the launches, Tora and Fasha and the others moving with the grim speed of people who knew exactly how little time was left, sealing pods and firing them off one after another, sending them screaming up through the atmosphere and out into the cold safety of space. And every single pod that cleared the sky was a few more living souls who would get to see tomorrow. And above all of it, the sky itself was beginning to change. If you have ever seen this moment in Dragon Ball, you already know the image, and you already feel the dread of it. Frieza, floating up there in the dark at the edge of the world, calm as a man ordering breakfast, slowly raising a single finger, and above that finger, a spark, just one tiny harmless-looking point of light at first. But it grew, and it kept growing. Orange, then red, swelling larger and larger and larger over the entire planet until it hung up there in the heavens like a second sun that should never, ever have existed. And every Saiyan on the surface, every warrior and every child and every soul running for a pod could look up and see it. And every one of them knew, in that instant, in their bones, exactly what it was. This was the end. The thing Goku had been screaming about, silently, helplessly, since the very second he had opened his eyes. And now it was here, hanging in the sky for all of them to see. And here is where Bardock did the single bravest thing of his entire life, and I need you to really understand the weight of it. Because in the old timeline, the one Goku remembered, this was the exact moment when Bardock died. He flew up alone, consumed by rage and grief, and hurled himself at Frieza in one final, hopeless, glorious last stand, and it changed absolutely nothing. He died proud, and he died furious, and he died completely, utterly pointless. This time, Bardock did something braver than that. Far braver. He stayed on the ground. Instead of flying up to throw his life away at the feet of a god, instead of chasing the glory of a doomed charge so he could feel, for one last moment, like a hero, he turned around. He turned his back on Frieza entirely, and he faced Frieza's soldiers, the foot troops swarming in to crush the escape and stop the pods from launching. And he planted himself, and his crew planted themselves beside him, directly between those soldiers and the launch site. And they fought. Not to win, because there was no winning. Not to be remembered, because there might be no one left to remember them. They fought for one single, simple, priceless thing. Time. Seconds. Minutes. Just long enough for a few more pods to claw their way up, off the ground and into the sky. It was the exact same courage Bardock had always had. But this time it was pointed in a completely different direction. Not a last stand for his own pride. A last stand for other people. And that is the difference between the man he was and the man his son helped him become. And it worked. Pod after pod after pod tore upward into the burning sky, while Bardock and his small, doomed, defiant team bought every single second of it with their own bodies and their own blood. Jean reached the very last pod with the baby clutched tight against her chest. Bardock was supposed to be right behind her. He was not. He was still out there, somewhere in the chaos, holding the line, and they both understood, without a word needing to be said, that there was no time left for him to make it back. None. And so there was a look between them. You know the one. The look that holds an entire lifetime inside it, every word that there was never time to say, every moment they would now never have. And then Jean, with tears streaming down her face, climbed into the pod, holding her son, and the hatch sealed shut between them and the world, and the pod launched. And as it rose, climbing fast through the burning air and up toward the dark, little Goku pressed one tiny, helpless hand against the cold curve of the glass, and he watched his home die. He watched that terrible ball of light come down. He watched the surface of planet Vegeta crack open and flood with white fire. He watched the whole world, the warriors and the families and the streets and the staging grounds and the lower districts and everything, everyone, swallowed in a single, silent, blinding flash. From up there in the cold of space, there was no sound to it at all. No roar, no scream, no thunder. Just light, and then nothing. A planet it was there, and then, simply it was not. He had saved a few dozen people, a handful of pods, scattering now in every direction into the endless dark, and he had lost everyone else. Tens of thousands of lives gone in the space of a single blink. And somewhere down in that fire, somewhere in that silent white light, was his father. The man he had only just met. The father he had never had in his first life, and could not save in this one. And I want to be completely honest with you about what this moment truly is, because it is the foundation that this entire series is built upon. Goku had the mind of the strongest being in the universe. He had memories, knowledge, foresight, an entire future packed inside his head. And it was not enough. It did not save the planet. It did not save most of the people. It could not even save his own father. The single most important idea in this whole story is sitting right here, in the silence and the wreckage above a dead world. Having all the answers does not mean you get to save everyone. Sometimes, even when you are the strongest soul alive, the very best you can do is save a precious few, and then carry the unbearable weight of every single one you could not. And what about Bardock? Did he die down there, in the fire, with all the rest of them? Here is the thing. We do not actually see it. The flames take the staging grounds, and the white light swallows the world, and the story, gently and deliberately, looks away before the very end. No body, no final shot, no confirmation, one way or the other. Just smoke and light, and a question with no answer hanging in the silence. And we are going to leave it exactly, precisely like that. Because the true fate of Bardock is going to become one of the great open mysteries of this entire saga, the kind of question that sits in the back of your mind and keeps you up at night wondering. So hold on to it. Tuck it away somewhere safe. It is going to matter so much more than you know right now. Up in the cold and the quiet, the pods drifted apart, scattering in every direction, a few dozen tiny, fragile sparks of a race that the universe had just tried, very nearly successfully, to erase from existence completely. And inside the very last of them, Jine held her baby close and stared out through the glass at the great, empty, aching place where their entire world used to be, and through her tears, she asked him the only question there was left in all the universe to ask. Where do we even go now? And the baby in her arms did not answer. He could not yet, not in any words that she would understand. But behind those small, dark, ancient eyes, the mind of Goku was already turning, already working, already running the numbers on a future that he, and he alone in all of creation, could still remember. He did not have an answer for her. Not yet. But he knew, with total certainty, one single thing. They had to survive long enough to find one, so he guided them. The same way he had guided the whole desperate escape, by pushing quiet images and gentle nudges into his mother's exhausted mind, he steered the scattered little fleet of pods toward a remote, forgotten world, far off the main travel routes. Far from anywhere that Frieza's empire had any reason at all to look. Somewhere quiet, somewhere green, somewhere they could land and hide, and most importantly, somewhere they could grow. And you might be wondering, right about now, why not just go straight to Earth? Goku knew about Earth. He knew it better than anywhere in the universe. He knew it was safe and peaceful and green and full of the people he had loved most in all his long life. So why not take them there, to the one place that felt like home? And the answer to that is one of the quietest, most important decisions Goku makes in this entire story. He did not take them to Earth precisely because he loved it. Because everywhere the Saiyans went, war had a way of following close behind. And the very last thing in all of existence that Goku was willing to do was drag the coming storm, Frieza, the Empire, the whole bloody mess of it, down onto the one peaceful planet he wanted, more than anything, to protect. Earth was the safe harbor. The place he was keeping safe and keeping secret and saving for later. For now, what his people needed was simply to vanish completely from the universe. And so they did. And this is where everything you have been waiting for, since the very first moment of this story, finally begins to happen. This is the part where the baby stops being helpless, because do you remember the whole agonizing problem of these opening days? Goku had the mind of a god and the body of a newborn. The knowledge was all there. Every technique, every transformation, every hard-won secret of power, but the body simply could not use a single bit of it. Well, the body was about to catch up. And not slowly, not the normal way, the way it takes everyone else. Something about being reborn, about a soul that had already climbed all the way to the very top of existence once before, meant that his body remembered. It remembered how to be strong. It remembered every brutal hour of training, every breath, every movement, every form. And the very moment that little body became capable of moving, and stretching, and training at all, it began to climb back up that impossible mountain at a speed that simply should not be possible for any living thing. The survivors watched it happen, and they could not believe what they were seeing. A toddler, barely old enough to stand on his own 2 feet, training like a seasoned master. A child who already knew, somehow, exactly how to move, exactly how to breathe, exactly how to gather and focus his energy, skipping past entire years of fumbling trial and error because he had already lived through every bit of it once before, in another life. He was not learning any of this. He was remembering it, and remembering, it turns out, is so very much faster than learning. Tora, Bardock's old and steady friend, would watch this tiny child outwork warriors 3 and 4 times his size, would watch him grasp in an afternoon things that took grown soldiers years, and he would just slowly shake his head, caught somewhere between amazement and a quiet, creeping unease. None of them had ever seen anything remotely like it. None of them had the words for what, exactly, they were raising out here in the green and the quiet. And speaking of words, there is something you need to know about this child now, something that is going to change the way you hear the entire rest of this story. Because to every single person on that hidden little world, the boy had a name. A Saiyan name, the one his mother and his lost father had given him on the day he was born. Kakarot, that was what Genie called him. That was what the survivors called him. To all of them, everyone, he was Kakarot. Genie's strange and impossibly gifted little boy. But that is not the name inside his own head. Inside, where no one else could reach, He was always, and only, Goku. The name he had earned in another life, on a faraway world none of these people had ever seen or heard of, the name given to him by a kind old grandfather he had not even been born to yet, in a future that no longer existed and now never would. Nobody around him knew that name. Nobody could. It was the last surviving piece of a whole vanished lifetime, a secret he carried entirely, completely, and utterly alone. So understand this and hold on to it. When I call him Goku, that is who he is to himself and to us, the ones who remember. And when they call him Kakarot, that is who he is to the world he now lives in. Hold on to that gap between the two names. It is small and it is quiet, and we are going to come back to it. And when we do, it is going to hurt more than you are ready for. As his power steadily grew, something else came back to him as well. His voice. Not out loud. Not yet. His body was still that of a small child. But that strange and miraculous ability to push thoughts into other minds, the broken, flickering, fragmentary telepathy that had saved every one of them back on planet Vegeta, began to sharpen. The fragments slowly became sentences. The flashing pictures slowly became actual, ordered words. And the very first time the survivors heard his voice, clear and calm and complete, speaking directly inside their heads, full and patient thoughts from a child who should barely have been able to babble, it stopped every one of them dead in their tracks. That was the moment they all truly, finally understood. Whatever this boy was, whatever had come back to them in the shape of Gene's son, the universe had never made one like him before. And for Gene, his mother, all of this was a strange and bittersweet and complicated thing to live through. She loved her son with every single piece of her heart, with a fierceness that had only grown since the night their world burned. But every single day, he grew into something that she understood just a little bit less. She had lost her husband. She had lost her world. She had lost her people and her home and everything familiar in all the universe. And the one thing she had left, the one precious thing, was a child who was quietly, steadily, day by day, turning into a legend right there in front of her eyes. There was so much pride in her when she looked at him. And right behind that pride, always, woven right through it, there was a thread of fear. Because a mother can always tell when her child is carrying something far too heavy for his shoulders. And hers, her little Kakarot, her secret Goku, was carrying the entire weight of a future that no one else even knew was coming. So for a while, out there on that hidden green world, things were almost peaceful. The survivors built themselves a life out of nothing. The children, the few they had managed to save, played, and laughed under a sky that was not red. And Goku trained and grew stronger by the week, faster than anyone watching him could quite believe. For the first time since he had opened his eyes under that red and dying sky, there was a stretch of genuine calm, a breath, a pause, but Goku knew far better than to trust the calm. Because he remembered something that none of the others did. He remembered, with the cold clarity of a man who had fought him, that Frieza does not leave loose ends, ever. And a few dozen Saiyans who had slipped, impossibly, through his fingers on the day he thought he had killed them all. Well, that was the loosest end of them all. And then, one perfectly ordinary day, in the middle of the quiet and the calm, it happened. A signal, faint, but utterly unmistakable to a boy who knew exactly what it meant. A scanning beam, sweeping silently across their hidden world, the precise kind of beam that comes from a Frieza Force scout ship out looking for something. Out looking for exactly the thing it had just found. They had been discovered. And here is the part that chilled Goku straight to the bone. According to his memory, according to everything he knew about how this was all supposed to go, this should not have happened yet. Not this soon, not this fast, not for a long, long time, and then he understood why, and it was a lesson that he would carry with him for the rest of this entire story. By saving those Saiyans, by reaching back and snatching a few dozen survivors out of a death that history had already written for them, he had done so much more than simply rescue a handful of lives. He had spooked Frieza. He had taken the most paranoid tyrant in the entire universe and made him more paranoid still. Because survivors meant loose ends, and loose ends meant the Emperor would look harder and search longer and hunt far more carefully than he ever had before. The very existence of these people, the proof of Goku's first great victory, was the thing that brought the hunters down on their heads. Changing the past did not just remove dangers. It created brand new ones, ones that had never existed before, born directly from the good that he had done. Every single life that Goku saved sent a ripple rolling outward into the future. And some of those ripples, he was about to learn, were going to come rolling back as waves. But there was something else out there in that wide universe. Something, someone, that Goku remembered very, very well, because his little band of survivors were not, in fact, the only Saiyans who had lived through the death of their world. A small handful of others had survived by the simple accident of being off-planet, away on missions, on the day that Frieza pulled the trigger. They were still out there, still alive, still serving the Empire. Still, every one of them, believing the cold lie that Frieza had told the galaxies, that a stray meteor had destroyed planet Vegeta. There was a proud and ruthless prince named Vegeta. There was a towering brute of a warrior named Nappa, and there was one more, a long-haired, low-class soldier, loyal to Frieza out of nothing nobler than survival. A warrior named Raditz. And Raditz, in the life that Goku remembered, was the very first enemy he had ever faced when his old story began. Raditz was the one who had come to Earth, all those years ago, searching for him. Raditz was the brother he had been forced to fight. Raditz was the brother he had been forced to kill. The very first death of that entire saga, struck down by Goku's own hand, because Raditz was his blood, his own older brother. So now, picture exactly where our hero stands, as this first chapter of his impossible new life comes to a close. A hidden world, just discovered. An empire, the most powerful force in all of existence, about to come hunting for him and everyone he loves. A few dozen survivors who cannot run and hide forever. And somewhere out there, far across the stars, wearing the armor of the very monster who murdered their entire race, the big brother he had once been forced to put down with his own two hands, Goku looked at all of it. This impossible, dangerous, heartbreaking, tangled situation. And a child, with the mind of a legend and the heart of a hero, made a decision. The running was over. The hiding was over. It was time to stop simply surviving, and to start, at last, fighting back. It was time to build something real out of the ashes of his murdered people. And he was going to begin, of all places, with the one person in the entire universe who shared his blood. He was going to reach his brother. He was going to turn him against the tyrant they had both been serving. He was going to save the same brother he had once been forced to kill. The Saiyans were not finished, not this time. Not while a boy who remembered the future still drew breath. And the child who would become Goku was about to go to war with the most powerful empire the universe had ever known. One impossible, dangerous, desperate step at a time. But that, my friends, is where the next part of the story begins. When we left off, a child with the mind of a legend had just made a decision that should have been impossible for someone his size to even consider. Stop running. Stop hiding. Start fighting back. And begin, of all the places he could possibly begin, by reaching out to the one single person in the entire universe who still shared his blood, his older brother, Raditz. A warrior who, at that very moment, was wearing the armor of the same monster who had murdered their world. So let me tell you how a small boy on a hidden planet goes about starting a war with the most powerful empire that has ever existed. Because it does not begin the way you might think. It does not begin with a punch, or a battle, or some daring midnight raid. It begins, of all things, with a conversation. But before that conversation could even happen, Goku had to spend long, patient months simply getting ready. And those months matter, so let me take you through them, because here is the honest truth of his situation. He was still small, still young, still climbing that impossible, vertical mountain of power, faster than anything in recorded history, but nowhere near the top of it yet. He could not simply march up to a Frieza Force squad and demand a meeting with his brother. So he prepared. Every single day, before the suns of that hidden world had even risen, he trained. He pushed that small body harder and harder, reclaiming pieces of his old lost strength one painful inch at a time. His muscles remembering things his size had no right to remember. And while he trained, the survivors built a life around him. They raised crops in soil that had never known a Saiyan hand. They taught the few rescued children to read the stars. They learned, slowly, how to be something other than soldiers. And at the center of it all was Jean, his mother, holding this strange little community together with nothing but warmth. And Goku studied. He studied his own memories the way a general studies maps before a war, laying out everything he knew about where Raditz would travel, and when, and with whom. He leaned on the one enormous advantage he possessed, an advantage that no strategist in the long history of the galaxy had ever held. He already knew Raditz. He knew him completely, all the way down to the bone. He knew the man's pride, and his deep-buried loneliness, and the fear that he kept hidden underneath all of that snarling bravado. He knew exactly what made Raditz cruel, and he knew exactly what, somewhere far down beneath all of it, still made him a brother. Because Goku had met this man once before, fought him, faced him and ended him in a life that no longer existed. So he did not plan to approach his brother as a stranger approaches a stranger. He planned to approach him as a man who had already read the final page of someone else's story. And I want you to understand just how strange those months of waiting were for the people around him. Imagine being one of the survivors on that hidden world. You followed a baby across the death of your entire civilization. You watched that baby become a toddler and then a small boy. You watched that small boy train like nothing you had ever seen. Watched him grow stronger in a single season than warriors grow in a decade. You heard his voice speak calmly inside your mind before he was old enough to speak it with his mouth. And now you watched him lay out battle plans against the most powerful empire in the universe with the cold confidence of a general who had already fought the war. Some of the survivors worshipped him. Some of them were quietly terrified of him. Most of them felt both at once. And in the middle of all of it stood Jean, the one person who looked at him and still somehow saw only her son. She would bring him food when he trained too long. She would sit with him at night when the weight of everything he remembered kept him from sleeping. She did not understand a fraction of what he carried, but she understood that it was heavy and that he was carrying it almost entirely alone, and so she simply refused to let him carry it without her nearby. And it was Jean, more than anyone, who kept the boy who would be Goku from becoming something cold, who reminded him, day after day, that he was not only a weapon aimed at Frieza, that he was a child, and that he was loved. Now, getting to Raditz at all was no small thing, and I do not want to skip past how dangerous it truly was. The first attempt nearly went wrong. Goku and a small handful of his strongest fighters slipped onto a backwater world where Raditz was scheduled to make planetfall, and they very nearly walked straight into Nappa and a full squad instead. They had to pull back into the shadows, hearts pounding, and wait, and try again, because a hidden band of refugees does not get second chances if they are seen too soon. So Goku planned it again, more carefully. He picked the moment. He picked the world. He waited until Raditz was alone, separated from his squad on a scouting run, and only then did he step out of the dark. And when that moment finally came, when Goku at last stood face to face with his brother for the first time in this entire new life, he did not raise his fists. He did not strike the first blow. He did the one single thing that no enemy of Raditz had ever done in all the man's long and violent years. He told him the truth. He told him that the meteor was a lie, that no rock from space had ever fallen on their home, that Frieza, the Master Raditz, had served loyally his whole life. The being he had bled for and would have died for without a second thought, had murdered the entire Saiyan race in a single quiet afternoon out of nothing nobler than convenience. He told him that their mother, Jean, was alive, hidden, waiting. He told him that their father Bardock had died, or perhaps died, holding a line with his own body so that a handful of survivors could escape into the dark. And he told him, finally, looking up at this towering, scowling warrior with those ancient and certain eyes, that the strange child standing in front of him was the baby brother Raditz had been told, all those years ago, was lost. And Raditz did not believe a single word of it. Of course he did not. Why on any world would he? Put yourself inside his head for just a moment. Here was a soldier who had survived his entire brutal existence by being loyal, by never asking questions, by simply serving whatever happened to be the strongest thing in the room and never, ever looking too closely at it. Loyalty to Raditz was not some noble virtue. It was a survival strategy. It was the only thing that had ever kept him breathing. And now here was a child, a low-class child of all things, claiming to be his dead baby brother, telling him that everything he had ever believed was a lie. His face twisted. His hand came up, charged with energy, ready to end this strange little trick where it stood. "You are a fool," he snarled, "or a spy, and either way you are about to be a dead one. But you cannot punch a man into changing his entire life. You cannot argue him out of everything he has ever known." So Goku did the only thing in all the universe that could possibly reach him. He showed him. He reached out with that strange and steadily growing power of his, the very same telepathy that had cracked open his father's heart in a quiet room under a dying sky. And he pushed the truth directly into his brother's mind. Not as words, which can always be doubted, but as memory, raw and whole and undeniable. He showed Raditz the death of their planet, the ball of light swelling in the sky, the white fire, the silent, total flash. He showed him their mother's face, alive and weeping in a launching pod, clutching a baby to her chest. He showed him their father turning his back on glory to buy strangers a few more seconds of life. He showed him things that Raditz had no possible way of knowing. In detail, too sharp and too painful and too real to be any kind of lie. He poured a lifetime into him in the space of a few heartbeats, and the great warrior staggered. The blast died in his hand. He went down to one knee in the dirt, gasping, his whole world coming apart behind his eyes. And he looked up at the small boy in front of him, and for the first time in his life, the snarl was gone, and what was left underneath it was something raw and lost and very young. And here is the part that makes all of this so much more than just a clever recruitment. Goku was not only trying to win himself a powerful ally, he was trying, desperately, with everything in him, to undo the single worst thing he had ever done. Because in the world that Goku remembered, Raditz had been the very first enemy of his old story, and Goku had killed him. With his own hands, holding his brother in place, locking his arms around him, while an attack tore straight through them both. It was the first death of that entire saga, the thing that set everything else into motion, and it had haunted Goku quietly for the rest of his long life. A small, cold stone he had carried in his chest for decades. He had never once gotten to know his brother as anything other than an enemy. And now, impossibly, the universe had handed him a second chance at the one regret he could never take back. A chance to make his brother live instead of die. A chance to make him family instead of a corpse on the floor. And slowly, painfully, over hours and then days, it worked. The loyalty cracked. The hard armor of denial that Raditz had worn his entire life began, piece by piece, to fall away. And for the first time in his entire life, Raditz turned his back on Frieza. But I cannot move past this moment without telling you about the one that came right after it, because it might be the most quietly powerful scene in this whole chapter. Goku brought his brother home. He brought Raditz, this hardened killer, this lifelong soldier of the Empire, back to the hidden world, and he brought him to their mother. And Jean, who had buried a husband and a world, and had never once in her life expected to see her eldest son again, turned around, and there he was. There is no clever way to narrate a moment like that, so I will just let you picture it. A mother who thought her family was ash, holding her grown son's scarred face in her two small hands. A brutal warrior of the Frieza Force, who had not wept since he was a child, breaking completely in his mother's arms. Two sons, the baby who remembered the future, and the brother who had been dragged back from the wrong side of a war, standing together in front of the one person who had loved them both before either of them was lost. For one evening, on a quiet green world far from anywhere, what was left of Bardock's family was whole again. Remember that evening. Hold on to it. Because this story is going to take it back from you, and it is going to take it back at the worst possible moment. And the days that followed that evening were, I think, the closest thing to happiness that Goku had felt since the moment he opened his eyes under that red and dying sky. Because for the first time, he was not alone with the weight of what he knew. He had a brother, a real one, a living one, standing right beside him, and the two of them trained together every single day, the small golden child and the towering older warrior, and Goku poured everything he had into Raditz, every technique, every secret, every hard-won lesson from a lifetime that had not happened yet. He watched his brother grow strong, watched the cruelty that Frieza had carved into him slowly soften into something better, something that looked almost like the man Raditz might have been if the universe had ever once been kind to him. They sparred until they could barely stand. They sat together under strange stars and talked, quietly, about the father neither of them had really known, about the mother they had both nearly lost, about a home that no longer existed anywhere but in Goku's memory. And Raditz, who had spent his whole life as a weapon pointed at other people, began, for the first time, to understand that he could be something else. A protector, a brother, a son. Jine would watch her two boys come home from training, bruised and laughing. And for those few precious weeks, the grief that had hollowed her out since the death of their world finally eased. This is what Goku was fighting for. Not just survival, not just revenge against Frieza. This, a family stitched back together out of ashes. And I am telling you about it in detail, about the laughter and the sparring and the quiet talks under the stars, precisely so that when it is torn away, you feel every bit of what Goku is about to feel. But there is always a cost. When Goku changes something, the universe always seems to send a bill. And the cost this time was that a giant of a Saiyan named Nappa had glimpsed the truth of Raditz turning, and Nappa answered to the proudest, most dangerous survivor of them all. He answered to Prince Vegeta. Now, Vegeta is one of the most important pieces on this entire board, so I want you to pay very close attention to how he comes into this story, because it is not at all how you might expect. He did not come storming in as a snarling villain looking for revenge. He came in curious, because word had begun to spread through the dark and dirty corners of the Empire. Whispers, rumors of a Saiyan resistance, of survivors who refused to die, of attacks carried out with strange techniques no one had ever seen. And at the very center of every one of those rumors, impossibly, a child. A boy who grew stronger by the week, who seemed to know things he had no way of knowing, who fought like he had 100 years of war packed into a body that had barely lived a handful of them. And eventually, of course, Vegeta came to see this boy for himself. He found the resistance, and he found Goku, and the two of them stood across from one another for the first time, the proud prince and the impossible child. And Vegeta did what Vegeta always does. He demanded a fight. He needed to measure this boy with his own fists to prove to himself that the rumors were nonsense, that no low-class nobody could possibly be more than a prince of the Saiyan race. And they fought. And it did not go the way Vegeta expected. Because the boy moved like water, read every attack before it landed, and matched a grown elite warrior blow for blow without ever once seeming afraid. Vegeta walked away from that fight with his pride in pieces, and a fire lit in his chest that would burn for the rest of this entire story. He had spent his whole life clinging to one belief above all others, that he, Vegeta, was destined to become the strongest Saiyan who ever lived, the legendary Super Saiyan of myth. And now some fatherless, low-class child was standing between him and that destiny. He became obsessed, not an ally, not yet quite an enemy. A wild card, circling, watching, waiting to see what this impossible boy truly was. And the boy, all the while, was becoming something genuinely incredible. With his brother Raditz now at his side, Goku set about building his resistance in earnest. And he did not build it the way anyone else in the universe could have, because no one else had what he had. He poured knowledge into these warriors that no being in this era had any right to possess. Techniques from a future that had not happened yet. Training methods refined over decades that were, technically, still decades away from being invented. Ways of sensing energy without a scouter. Of reading an enemy by the feel of their power alone. Of gathering and focusing an exploding ki that the Frieza Force, for all its might, had never even dreamed of. He took a ragged, frightened handful of low-class survivors and forged them, patiently, day by day, into something the galaxy had never seen. And they began to win. Small strikes at first, a supply depot here, a patrol there, then bolder ones. A rumor became a threat. A threat became a name whispered in fear across the Empire. The Saiyan resistance was real, and it was growing, and it was led by a child. And I want to show you one of those raids, just one, so that you understand what this resistance had become. Picture a Frieza Force outpost on a conquered world, a fortress of armor and gun emplacements and hundreds of hardened soldiers, the kind of place that had never once in its history been seriously threatened. And then picture them arriving, not in a screaming charge, but quietly, from the shadows, exactly where the patrols were not. Exactly when the guard was thinnest, because their commander had handed them a plan so precise it was almost frightening. Goku did not waste a single life. He knew where every soldier would be standing, because he understood, better than anyone alive, how the Frieza Force thought. The resistance moved like ghosts and struck like lightning, freeing the prisoners that the outpost had been built to hold, seizing the supplies they needed to survive, and vanishing back into the dark before the Empire even understood what had hit it. And every time they did it, the legend grew. The soldiers of the Empire began to whisper about a golden-eyed child who could not be caught, who seemed to know their orders before they did, who left no trace but a string of impossible victories. Frieza put a price on his head. The price did nothing but make him a hero to every enslaved world in the sector. And somewhere out in the dark, Prince Vegeta heard each of these stories and ground his teeth and followed the resistance from a careful distance, never quite attacking, never quite leaving. A shadow at the edge of every victory, wrestling with a question he could not answer. What was this boy? And why did the universe seem to be bending itself around him? And his own power kept climbing that impossible, vertical curve. Every single week, his body remembered a little more of what it used to be. He was a child still, small and young, his voice not yet even broken. But the power growing inside that small frame was beginning, quietly, to bend the world around it. But, and this matters more than almost anything, knowledge and growth alone were not going to be enough. And Goku learned that lesson in the hardest way that there is. Because in one of those raids, a strike that should have been clean, things went wrong. A Frieza Force captain they had not accounted for, stronger than the reports, turned a victory into a slaughter. And one of the survivors, one of the people Goku had carried in his heart, all the way from the death of planet Vegeta. A man whose family Goku had personally loaded onto an escape pod with his own push thoughts did not come home. He fell shielding two of the rescued children with his own body. And the golden child, for all his speed, for all his knowledge, was a half a second too far away to reach him. And it was the lesson of the dying planet all over again, written one more time in fresh blood. He could be strong. He could be brilliant. He could be 10 full steps ahead of every enemy on the field. And people would still die. Because he could not be everywhere at once. Because strength was never, ever, the whole answer. And it broke something small in him. Every single time, another little crack in a heart that was already full of them. And it taught him, with cold and total finality, that to even dream of standing against Frieza himself, he was going to need the one thing his people treated as a campfire legend. He was going to have to do the truly impossible. He was going to have to become a Super Saiyan. And when he finally said those words out loud to his gathered warriors, he did not say them the way a man says a wish, or a hope, or a prayer. He said them the way a man remembers something, quietly, plainly, with absolute certainty. Because he had been one before. He knew exactly what it felt like. He knew exactly what it could do. He simply had to find his way back to it, and there was the wall in the road. Because the body he was in, for all its incredible growth, was still a child's body. Climbing fast, yes, but not yet strong enough to hold the raw, screaming power of that golden transformation. And even if it had been ready, the change itself had a lock on it that no amount of training in any universe could pick. Super Saiyan was not a switch you could flip the moment you decided you were ready. It needed something more, something deeper, something that Goku, in his quietest moments, was genuinely afraid of, because he remembered exactly what it had cost him the first time. So he did the one thing that only he, in all the universe, could do. He used his knowledge of a future that no longer existed to reach for a shortcut that existed nowhere else in all of creation. He gathered his people, set a course, and led them across the dark to a green and distant world. A world that, if you know this story, is going to make you sit straight up in your seat. A planet called Namek. And here is exactly why this is such a brilliant move, so let me lay it all out. Goku was the only being alive in that entire era who knew the deep secret of Namek. He knew that somewhere on that quiet green world, in a small house at the top of a high plateau, lived an ancient and impossibly powerful being. The Grand Elder of the Namekian people. And this Grand Elder possessed a gift that was almost beyond belief. He could reach inside another living creature, find all of the hidden, sleeping, locked away potential buried deep within their very cells, and unlock it, all of it, in a single instant. Not years of training, not a slow and bloody climb up the mountain. One touch of an ancient hand and a warrior's strength could multiply many, many times over in the space of a single breath. It was, for lack of any better word, the cheat code of the universe. And Goku knew exactly where to find it. And there was a second prize waiting on Namek too. One even more tempting and far more dangerous. Because the Namekians had their own set of Dragon Balls. 7 of them, scattered across that green world, capable, when gathered together and the right words were spoken, of summoning a great dragon and granting wishes, real wishes, the kind that bend the rules of reality itself, including, most precious and most painful of all, the wish to bring back the dead. And Goku, of all the beings in the universe, had a long and terrible list of the dead. The idea that he might claw even a few of them back out of the fire was almost more than his battered heart could bear to hope for. But here is the thing about going to Namek. Here is the trap built right into the heart of the plan. Goku was not the only one who wanted what that green world had to offer, because Frieza wanted Namek too. The Emperor had grown paranoid in a way he never had in the original telling of this story. The rumor of a golden Super Saiyan hunting and bleeding his empire had gotten under his perfect cold skin and lodged there like a splinter. And so Frieza had come to those very same Namekian Dragon Balls, chasing one wish above all others. Immortality. The power to live forever. The power to never ever be killed by the legend that he had spent his entire life secretly fearing. 2 forces, racing for the exact same prize, on the exact same world, at the exact same time. There was only ever going to be one way it could end, on a battlefield. Goku knew it best of all. When they arrived, Namek was exactly as Goku remembered it, and the sight of it nearly stopped his heart. Green seas. Green sky. Quiet villages of gentle people who wanted nothing to do with the wars of empires. People who, in the timeline he remembered, had been slaughtered almost to the last for the crime of sitting on top of a wish. Goku moved fast. He led his people to the high plateau, to the small house at its top, and he came before the Grand Elder. And the ancient Namekian looked down at this strange Saiyan child, this small warrior carrying the weight of 2 lifetimes in his eyes. And he understood, in the way that very old and very wise beings sometimes do, that something about this one was not from here. He said nothing about it. He simply reached out one enormous, ancient hand and laid it upon the boy's small head. And Goku's power erupted. It surged upward to heights that genuinely stunned even Goku himself, who had thought, after everything, that he remembered exactly what he was capable of. Every locked door inside him was thrown open at once. But there was something else Goku did on Namek, something that had nothing to do with power, and it tells you everything about who this hero is. Because Goku remembered Namek. He remembered what happened here, in the world he came from. He remembered the gentle Namekian people, farmers and elders and children who wanted nothing but to tend their villages in peace, being hunted and slaughtered village by village, simply because they happened to be sitting on top of a wish that Frieza wanted. It was one of the great quiet horrors of his first life, and he was not going to let it happen again. So even in the middle of his own desperate race, even with his brother and his people and his one shot at the legend all on the line, Goku spent precious time and precious strength protecting the Namekians. He sent warnings ahead to their villages. He pulled his fighters off the most direct path to shield the innocent ones who lay in Frieza's way. It cost him. Every soul he stopped to save was time he did not spend on his own survival. But Goku had learned the hardest lesson of his entire existence on the day his planet burned, and he had learned it again and again and again. That saving people is the whole point. That a victory built on a pile of the innocent dead is not a victory worth having. And so the boy who could not save his own world bled himself thin trying to save someone else's. Because that, deep down, underneath all the power and all the memory, is simply who Goku is. His brother Raditz was unlocked too, his strength leaping far beyond anything a low-class soldier had ever known. And so were the strongest of the resistance fighters who had survived this far. And then the race truly began. They scattered across that green world to gather the 7 Dragon Balls, before Frieza's forces could close in and the Empire's hunters came for them. Cruel and powerful elites who had carved their way through 1,000 worlds. And these were not ordinary soldiers. Frieza had sent his very best, an elite unit of the deadliest fighters in his entire empire, monsters of strength and skill who treated slaughter like a performance and had never once in their careers lost a fight. In the timeline Goku remembered, a squad like this had been a nightmare that took everything he and his friends had to survive. So Goku did not meet them head-on, fist to fist, the way pride might have demanded. He outthought them. He knew their arrogance, their habits, the way they loved to show off and toy with weaker prey before finishing them. And he used every bit of it against them. He split them apart, picked them off one at a time, baited their pride into mistakes, and turned their own overconfidence into the weapon that brought them down. His brother Raditz, newly unlocked and burning to prove himself, fought at his side and tore through enemies that would once have killed him without a thought. The resistance fought like people who had nothing left to lose and everything in the universe to protect. It was brutal, and it was costly, and good people fell. But one by one, the unbeatable elites of Frieza's empire went down on that green world, defeated by a ragged band of refugees and a child who had quite simply read the end of their story before it began. There were brutal fights in the valleys and over the seas. The resistance bled for every ball they claimed. But they were faster, and they were smarter, and above all they had a boy who knew exactly where each one was hidden. And for one shining moment, they managed it. They gathered all 7. They summoned the great dragon, the sky going black, the enormous serpent coiling up into the heavens above them. And they even made a wish, maybe 2. They reached back into the cold grip of death and pulled a few precious, lost souls home again. Watched them gasp and open their eyes, restored to a life they had already surrendered. And I want you to sit with the cruelty of that choice for just a moment, because it is one of the quietest gut punches in this whole story. A wish that can bring back the dead, and a list of the dead that is tens of thousands of names long. How do you choose? How does anyone choose? Goku stood under that great dark dragon with the entire weight of his murdered race pressing down on him, and he had to pick. Not who deserved it most, because they all deserved it. Not who he loved most, because how do you even begin to measure that? He had to make the cold, strategic, unbearable choice of who the resistance needed. Who could fight? Who could help save the ones still living? He had to think like a general while his heart was screaming like a son. And every name he spoke aloud to that dragon was 1,000 names he did not. Fathers he left in the dark. Children he left in the dark. Friends from a life nobody else even remembered. Left in the dark. This is the thing this story will never let him have, no matter how strong he becomes, no matter what miracles he gets his hands on. The clean victory. The happy ending where everyone comes home. Even holding a wish that could raise the dead, Goku was forced, one more time, to save a few and bury the rest. But it was not even allowed to be that, because Frieza's full assault came crashing down out of the sky before they could finish, before they could spend every wish, before they could work their way down that long and painful list. And suddenly, there was no more time. No more time for dragons, no more time for miracles, no more time for mercy. The dragon vanished, the wishes spent, the list still long. Save who you can. Lose the rest. The dragon was never going to be the easy answer. Nothing in this story ever is. And then the door closed for good. Because the Grand Elder, that ancient Namekian, who had stood watch over this quiet world since before the Empire was born, was already dying. He was old beyond counting, frail beyond belief, and the strain of everything, the unlocking, the terror of Frieza descending on his people, the sheer weight of his years, finally took him. And here is the thing you have to understand about the Namekian Dragon Balls. The thing that turns this into a wound that will never close. Those Dragon Balls were tied to his life. They were his creation, an extension of his very soul. And the moment the Grand Elder breathed his last, every single one of them, all 7, went dark. They cracked. They dulled. They turned, in an instant, to plain and lifeless stone. The magic was gone. The wishes were over. Forever. There would be no gathering them again next year, no second chances, no quiet plan to slowly bring the dead home one summoning at a time. The one power in all the universe that could undo death had just died itself on a battlefield in the middle of a war. So understand, going forward, with everything that is about to happen. From this moment on, anyone Goku loses. He loses for real. There is no more dragon. There is no takebacks. Death, from here, is permanent. Remember that, because the universe is about to make him learn it in the cruelest way imaginable. And then, with the wishes gone, and the survivors scattered across a burning world, Frieza arrived in person. And the boy who remembered the future finally stood, at long last, face to face with the monster who had started every single piece of his pain. The one who had burned his world. The one who had killed his father. The cold and smiling source of all of it, floating there in the air in front of him. And Frieza looked down at this Saiyan child, and he saw nothing. Just a whelp. Just another low-class monkey to be stepped on and forgotten. He had absolutely no idea that this was the very same baby he had once tried, and failed, to murder along with the rest of the planet, come all the way back around to face him at the end. And the battle began. And I truly wish I could tell you that Goku won it easily, but he did not. Because here, in this fight, the cruelest irony of Goku's entire strange existence was laid completely bare, and I really want you to feel the full crushing weight of it. Goku knew exactly how to beat Frieza. He remembered it. Every single weakness, every transformation, every dirty trick, every pattern. The entire fight was already written out, complete, inside his head. He had, in a very real sense, already won this exact fight once before, in another life. And his body, that incredible, fast-growing, miraculous child's body, still could not quite do what his mind already knew, perfectly, how to do. He fought brilliantly. He fought far beyond anything a child his age had any right to manage. He danced around attacks before they fully formed. He countered moves before they came. He made Frieza work, made him sweat, made the Emperor take this seriously, in a way he had not done in 1,000 years. The Resistance fought beside him, and even Vegeta, drawn to the battle like everything else, threw himself into it, fighting for his own pride and his own destiny against the family that had enslaved his race. For a while, the whole galaxies might have held its breath. But Frieza was Frieza, and one by one, the Emperor peeled away his own forms, shedding his disguises like a snake shedding skins, growing larger and colder, and more monstrous and more powerful with each transformation. And with every form Frieza dropped, the gap between what Goku knew and what Goku could actually do widened into a chasm. And this is where the battle became something out of a nightmare, because Frieza did not simply fight Goku. He went after everything Goku loved, the way he always did, because cruelty was not a side effect for Frieza, it was the entire point. He tore through the resistance to get to the boy. He swatted aside warriors who had survived the death of their own planet, refugees who had crossed the galaxy on a child's hope. Goku threw himself everywhere at once, trying to be in 10 places, trying to shield 10 people, moving faster than he had ever moved in this small body, and still he could not cover them all. He would block one killing blow only to watch another land somewhere he could not reach. Even Vegeta, the proud prince, found himself fighting at the boys' side against their common enemy, hurling everything he had at the Emperor who had enslaved the Saiyan race, and even Vegeta was nothing but an insect to Frieza in his final form. The prince went down hard, broken and humiliated, the dream of his own destiny crushed in front of his eyes, and Goku fought on, alone now, bleeding, exhausted, watching the family he had built get carved away from him piece by piece. The resistance fell around him. His friends went down, one after another, and it was not enough. All his knowledge, all his memory, all his stolen glimpse of the future. It was not enough, and then the universe came to collect its oldest debt, Raditz, the brother. The brother that Goku had crossed the entire galaxy to find. The brother he had moved heaven and earth to save. The brother he had pulled out of one death and dragged back into his mother's arms for one whole perfect evening. Frieza struck him down, right there, in front of his little brother's eyes. One careless, casual, contemptuous blow from a god who barely even noticed he was doing it, who could not have picked Raditz out of a crowd, who ended a life that meant everything to Goku as easily as swatting an insect from the air. And in that shattering, breaking moment, kneeling in the torn-up dirt of that dying green world, Goku finally understood the very cruelest rule of his entire impossible second life. He had changed how his brother died. He had not been able to change weather. The universe had been owed this death once before, long ago, in another lifetime, and now it had come back around to collect. No matter what Goku did, no matter how far he reached, no matter how hard he fought, you can change who dies, this story whispers, again and again. You can change the where, and the when, and the how. But the weather, the simple terrible fact of the loss itself, fights you with everything it has. And so very often, it wins. He caught his brother as he fell. He held him, there on his knees, his small arms wrapped around a warrior twice his size. And there, with his dying brother in his arms and the whole battlefield burning around the both of them, the boy who had carried a secret completely alone for his entire second life finally let it go. He told Raditz the truth, the whole truth. He told him that there had been another life, another world, a place where the two of them had been enemies, where they had fought, where Goku had been the one to end him. And then he spoke, out loud, for the very first time to another living soul in all of this new existence, the name that no one in this universe had ever heard. He told his brother, softly, his voice cracking, that he had carried another name once, in another life, a name from a world neither of them would ever see, Goku and Raditz, the brother from a life that no longer existed, the brother who had died once before as an enemy and now died again, at last, as family, with his mother's love still fresh on him from one perfect evening. Raditz slipped away into the dark hearing an apology that had crossed 2 entire timelines just to reach him, and that was the lock, the grief, and the rage, and the unbearable, world-ending weight of a death that he had moved an entire universe to prevent and still could not stop. All of it detonated inside that small body at once. And the child's frame that had been climbing, and climbing, and climbing that endless mountain for years finally, in that one breaking moment, caught all the way up to the ancient soul burning inside of it. The ground cracked apart beneath his feet. The very air began to scream and tear. A pillar of pure golden light tore straight up out of him and lit that whole dark, dying battlefield, like a second sunrise breaking over the world. His black hair lifted and stood and burned gold. His eyes flashed a fierce and terrible green. For the first time in this entire timeline, years and years before it was ever supposed to happen, in the small grieving body of a child kneeling beside his dead brother, the legend walked the universe again, a Super Saiyan. The very thing Vegeta had dreamed of becoming for his entire life. The very thing Frieza had built his deepest, most secret paranoia around. The ancient myth, the campfire story. The impossible legend that had not been seen in 1,000 years. Real, golden, blazing. And standing right there in front of all of them. Born, of all things, from a brother's death. And Vegeta, broken and bleeding at the edge of that battlefield, watched a low-class child become the very thing he had chased his whole life. And something in the proud prince changed in that moment that would take the rest of the story to fully understand. And the fight changed completely. Because now, at last, the knowledge and the body were one and the same thing. Everything Goku knew, his hands could finally do, and he took every single ounce of suffering that Frieza had ever inflicted on him, on his brother, on his father, on his entire murdered race, and he gave it back. All of it. The Emperor who had ruled the universe through pure terror for longer than anyone could remember found himself, for the very first time in his endless and untouchable life, standing on the wrong end of the fear. He found himself, impossibly, losing. And I need you to picture this, because it is the payoff that the entire first half of this story has been building toward. A child, a grieving golden child, hair blazing like fire, eyes burning green, standing in the ruins of a battlefield over the body of his brother. And in front of him, the most feared being in the history of the universe, the emperor of everything, the monster who burned worlds for fun, actually starting to panic. Every blow Goku landed now carried the weight of 2 lifetimes of loss behind it. Every strike was for his father, holding a line in a burning city. For his brother, dead twice over for the crime of being his blood. For his mother, who had lost everything and would soon lose more. For the tens of thousands, he could not pull back from death, and the Namekians and the survivors and every single soul Frieza had ever stepped on across his endless reign. Goku hit him and hit him. And the universe itself seemed to lean in to watch a tyrant finally taste the fear he had been feeding the galaxy for 1,000 years. It was everything the audience had been waiting for. It was glorious. And it was about to cost more than Goku could possibly have known. But please do not mistake this for an easy ending, because Frieza had one final card left to play, his true final form, the full, total 100% of his monstrous and perfect power, a level of strength he almost never had any reason to use, because in all his long reign, almost nothing had ever been worth the trouble. And now, for the first time in living memory, he played it. He stopped toying. He stopped holding back even a sliver, and he unleashed the entire staggering totality of what he was. And the two of them, the golden grieving child and the perfect smiling emperor, at his absolute peak, tore that entire planet apart fighting one another. Mountains crumbled to dust. The green seas boiled away to steam. The sky itself split open. Two of the most powerful beings the universe had ever produced, throwing every last thing they had into one another, on a dying world coming apart beneath their feet. And in the end, the legend won. Goku stood. And Frieza did not. The tyrant who had murdered an entire race, who haunted the nightmares of the whole galaxy, who had ruled the universe through nothing but fear for longer than most of his subjects had been alive, fell, years before he was ever meant to. Defeated, against all of history, by a Saiyan child who simply, stubbornly, impossibly refused to lose. It should have been the single greatest victory imaginable. The villain dead, the monster slain. The source of all his pain finally gone from the universe, but Goku could not feel a single piece of it. Because his brother's body was still lying there, beside him still warm. Because the green world all around him was a smoking ruin. Because the victory, however total, however historic, had cost him the one single person he had crossed the galaxy and broken his own heart to come and save. This was not triumph. It did not feel anything like triumph. It felt like surviving. It felt like grief, paid for at the very highest price the universe could name. And that right there is exactly the kind of hero this Goku truly is. He wins, and it still breaks him. He saves the universe, and he buries his brother, and the two things happen in the very same breath, on the very same broken ground. And somewhere, far away, a gentle mother named Genie was about to learn that she had gotten her eldest son back for exactly one evening before losing him forever. And Goku knew that he would have to be the one to tell her, and he did tell her. That, too, is part of who this hero is. He did not hide from it, did not send someone else, did not let her hear it secondhand. He went home, golden no longer, just a tired and grieving child again, and he found his mother, and he told her the truth. That Raditz had died a free man, a good man, her son, and not Frieza's weapon. That he had died protecting his brother. That in his final moments he had known he was loved. And Jean, who had buried a husband in a world, and now had buried a son she had only just gotten back, did the thing that mothers do. She held her remaining child while he broke, and she let herself break with him, and the two of them grieved together under those strange and distant stars. The resistance mourned with them. There were no bodies to bury, only memories to speak aloud, and they spoke them long into the night, telling stories of the warriors who had fallen, of the brother who had come home just long enough to be lost again. And in the morning, Goku stood up and wiped his eyes and looked out at what was left of his people and understood that the war was not over, that it had, in fact, only just truly begun, because he, of all beings, knew exactly what was coming next. And here is the part that should make the back of your neck go cold. Killing Frieza early did not make the universe safer. Let me say that again, slowly, because it matters so much to everything that comes next. It made the universe more dangerous. Because Goku, of all the beings in all of existence, knew something the rest of the celebrating galaxy did not. Frieza was never the top of the food chain. Frieza had a family. He had a brother, and he had a father. And both of them were stronger than Frieza had ever been. They were the part of that terrible family that no one ever spoke about. The deeper shadow standing behind the shadow. And they were watching. And they were waiting. From the very heart of an empire that stretched across the stars. And far away, on a great cold throne at the dark center of all of it, the news arrived. The unkillable Frieza, the emperor of the universe. The most powerful being the galaxy had ever known. Dead. And he had been killed, the trembling reports all said, by a golden Saiyan. By a warrior out of ancient legend, by a Super Saiyan. An old and terrible king received this news in complete and total silence. He did not rage. He did not weep. He simply sat and considered it, with the cold and bottomless patience of a creature who had ruled longer than entire civilizations, had risen and crumbled to dust. And beside him, his other son. A sleek and cruel and brilliant figure who had always, quietly, privately, believed himself the better of the two brothers. Slowly he turned. And a small, cold, genuinely delighted smile spread across his face, and he spoke the words that would haunt the final chapter of this entire story. A Super Saiyan. So the legend was true. The Emperor was gone. Frieza was finished, years and years ahead of his time, struck down by a grieving golden child standing over the body of his brother. But the dynasty that stood behind him, the colder and stronger and far more patient power that had always lurked quietly at his back, was only just beginning to stir. And Goku, golden and grieving and stronger now than he had ever been in either of his two lives, had no idea, none at all, that in slaying the Emperor, he had just kicked open a door to something far, far worse than anything Frieza had ever been. And that, my friends, is where the final part of our story begins. Goku had just done the impossible. He had killed Frieza years before the universe ever expected, as a child, with the legend of the Super Saiyan burning gold around him. And if this were a normal story, that would be the happy ending. The tyrant is dead. The good guys win. Roll the credits, cue the music, send everyone home smiling. The boy who lost his world as an infant grows up to avenge it and topple the monster who burned it. A perfect ending. A clean one. But you have been with me for 2 whole chapters now, and you know by now that this story does not do clean. It never has. From the very first moment, when a baby with the mind of a god could not even save the planet he was born on, this story has been telling you one thing over and over. That victory and loss are not opposites here. They come together, in the same breath, on the same ground. That every door Goku kicks open leads to another, darker room. And the death of Frieza, the greatest victory of his entire second life, was about to prove that Rule 1 final, enormous time. Because the moment Frieza fell, Goku felt the ground shift under the entire galaxy. And for the very first time in either of his 2 lives, the boy who knew everything was about to come face to face with something he did not see coming. Far out in the dark, on the throne at the dead center of the Empire, the news had already arrived. The unkillable Frieza was dead, struck down by a golden Saiyan straight out of legend. And the 2 beings who heard that news did not panic. They did not grieve. They were, if anything, interested. Because Frieza, the monster who had terrorized the universe for generations, had never actually been the strongest member of his own family. His brother Cooler was stronger. His father, the old king, was stronger still. And unlike Frieza, those 2 did not underestimate anything, ever. They had spent their whole long lives watching Frieza throw his weight around, watching him toy with his enemies and gloat and waste time, and they had quietly judged him for it. They were not going to make his mistakes. They were going to study this golden child, and then they were going to erase him. And this right here is where Goku's single greatest weapon finally began to fail him. So I want you to really feel the shift, because it changes everything about the kind of hero he has to become in this final chapter. For his entire second life, Goku had been playing the most dangerous games in the universe with the answer key sitting right there in his hand. He knew who everyone was. He knew how strong they were. He knew what they would do before they did it, because he had lived it all once before. That knowledge was his sword and his shield. It was, in many ways, the thing that had kept him and everyone he loved alive. But Cooler and the old king were different. Because in the world that Goku remembered, these 2 had barely fought at all. He had almost no memories of them, no playbook, no list of weaknesses scrawled in the margins of his mind. He knew their names, and he knew they were strong, and that was very nearly all he knew. So when they came for him, the boy who always knew exactly what was coming suddenly, terrifyingly, did not. For the first time since he was reborn under that red and dying sky, Goku was fighting blind. And I want you to understand that this frightened him more than any power level ever could. because it forced him to ask a question that he had been quietly avoiding his entire life. How much of his strength had ever really been strength at all? And how much of it had simply been knowing the future? Take away the answer key, and who was he? Was he still the strongest, or was he just a scared child who happened to have read the ending? He did not know. And he was about to find out the hardest possible way, and the Cold Dynasty came prepared. They had read every report, studied every rumor, picked apart every one of Goku's impossible victories. They knew it was a Saiyan. They knew it was organized. They knew about the golden transformation, the legend that their own son and brother had feared. So they did not march in arrogant the way Frieza had. They came like a machine. Cold, patient, methodical, built from the ground up to win. They did not gloat. They did not toy. They struck at the resistance where it was weakest, cut off its escape routes, smashed its safe havens one by one. And then Cooler revealed something that turned Goku's blood to ice. A form. A transformation that Goku had never seen, never read about, never once imagined in either of his lives. And for a long and horrifying stretch, the resistance was simply outmatched. Hurled back again and again, fighting an enemy that their all-knowing leader could not predict and could not counter. And I want you to really understand what that did to Goku, because it is the heart of this whole final chapter. Every fight he had ever fought, in 2 entire lifetimes, he had walked into already knowing how it would go. He had always had that quiet voice in the back of his mind whispering the answer. Hit here. Dodge now. He transforms in a moment. Be ready. But against Cooler, that voice was silent. For the first time, Goku threw a punch and genuinely did not know if it would land. He braced for an attack, and it came from somewhere else entirely. He led his people into a battle and could not promise them how it would end, because he truly did not know. And there was one terrible night, on a battlefield lit by a burning sky, when it very nearly ended for good. Cooler caught him off guard with a move he had no memory of, drove him down into the dirt, and stood over him ready to finish the legend once and for all. And in that moment, Goku, the boy who had always known what came next, looked up at his own death and realized that he had no idea whether he was about to survive it. He had never felt so powerful and so helpless at the same time. It was only the resistance, throwing themselves recklessly into the gap, buying him the seconds he needed to rise, that saved him. He survived that night, but he survived it as something new. Not a boy reciting a future he remembered. A warrior fighting in the dark for the very first time. But here is the thing. Goku was not alone in this fight, and this is where one of the most satisfying payoffs in the entire story finally arrives, so savor it. Vegeta the Proud Prince, the wild card. The one who had circled this resistance for so long, never quite an ally, never quite an enemy, nursing his wounded pride and his impossible dream of being the strongest Saiyan alive. He had watched a low-class child become the Super Saiyan that he himself had chased his whole life, and it had broken something in him, and it had also, slowly, started to build something new. Because now the dynasty asking for his surrender, the family demanding that he kneel, was the very same family that had enslaved the Saiyan race, that had used his people as attack dogs for generations, that had stood by and smiled while his world was reduced to dust. And a prince, whatever else he is, has his pride. So Vegeta made his choice. He did not make it because he had gone soft. He did not make it out of love or friendship or any of the things that moved Goku. He made it because no son of the Saiyan King was going to bow to the family of Frieza for one single day more. He threw himself into the war on the side of the resistance, on his own stubborn, furious terms, and for the first time in this entire saga, the 2 most powerful Saiyans alive stood back to back against a common enemy. The legendary Super Saiyan and the prince who would die before he admitted he was anything less. And let me tell you, the galaxy had never seen anything like the 2 of them fighting on the same side. And the strange thing, the thing Goku had not expected, was how much he needed it. Because Vegeta did not fight like Goku. Vegeta did not carry 2 lifetimes of memory or a head full of answers. Vegeta fought on pure instinct, on rage and pride, and a lifetime of being underestimated. And in a war where Goku's foreknowledge was useless, that instinct was worth more than any answer key. Again and again, when Goku froze, caught off guard by an enemy he could not predict, it was Vegeta who reacted, first snarling, reckless, brilliant, covering the blind spots that Goku no longer knew he had. And slowly, without either of them ever once saying it out loud, because neither of them ever would, the 2 strongest Saiyans alive learned to trust each other. Not to like each other, never that. They bickered constantly, competed over everything, each one driving himself half to death trying to outdo the other. But Goku began to understand something about the Proud Prince that he had never quite grasped in his first life. That underneath all the arrogance was a warrior who had been a slave his entire childhood, who had watched his own father bow to Frieza, who had clawed and bled for every scrap of pride he owned, because pride was the only thing the Empire had never been able to take from him. And fighting beside Vegeta in a war neither of them could predict, made Goku stronger than fighting alone ever had. Two Saiyans, a galaxy's last two princes of a sort, pushing each other higher and higher with every battle, exactly the way the legend always said the Saiyans were meant to, and it cost them. Of course it did. This is that kind of story, and it has been from the very first frame. The war against the Cold Dynasty was long, and it was brutal, and the resistance bled for every single inch of ground they took. More than one of the survivors who had made it all the way from the death of planet Vegeta, who had crossed the galaxy on a child's impossible hope, did not live to see the end of this fight. And Goku, even now, even this strong, even golden, was still doing the exact thing that had broken his heart on the very first day of this entire story. He was still burying people he had sworn to protect. The power had changed. The scale had changed. The enemies had changed. But that one terrible truth never did. He could not be everywhere. He could not save everyone. And every loss carved itself into him, just as deep as the first. And there was one loss in that war that I have to tell you about, because it broke something in him that even Raditz had not. One of the very first survivors, one of the families he had loaded onto a pod with his own pushed thoughts in the last burning hours of planet Vegeta. A man who had followed that baby across the death of a world, who had raised his children in the quiet of the hidden planet, who had picked up a weapon and joined the resistance not because he was a warrior, but because the strange child who saved his family had asked. He fell in the war against the Cold Dynasty, holding a line so that others could escape, and Goku reached him just a moment too late, the same way he was always just a moment too late. And as the man died, he did not curse Goku for leading him into this. He thanked him. He thanked him for the extra years, for the children who got to grow up, for the life he never would have had if a baby had not reached out and changed the future on the day their world burned. And Goku held him and understood, with a fresh and terrible clarity, the true shape of the bargain he had made. Every single person he had saved on that first day, he had saved into a life that he would then ask them to risk. He had not given them safety. He had given them more time and more love and more years. And then he had led some of them right back into the fire, and he had to decide, kneeling there, whether that was a gift or a cruelty. And the dying man, with his last breath, decided it for him. A gift, he said. It was always a gift, and then he was gone. But he kept climbing. Because that was the one thing about this Goku that never, ever stopped. Every brush with death, every impossible fight, every moment he was pushed past what he thought were his limits, drove his power higher up that endless vertical curve. And against the Cold Dynasty, fighting blind, with no memories to guide him, he reached heights that even he, with all his foreknowledge, had never once touched in his first life. And there is something almost beautiful in that, if you think about it. Because for the first time, he was not walking a road he had already paved. He was not reattaining old power. He was discovering new power, earning it the hard way, in fights he could not predict, against enemies he did not remember. He was, at long last, writing something new. And it turned out that the boy was even stronger without the answer key than he had ever been with it. And in the end, the Golden Child and the Proud Prince and the last ragged remnant of the Saiyan resistance did what no force in the history of the universe had ever managed. They brought down the dynasty that had ruled the stars for generations. Cooler fell. The old king fell. The empire of the Colds, the cold and patient shadow that had hung over the entire galaxy since before most of its worlds were even born, was shattered, broken, finished, by a band of refugees and a child who had simply refused, over and over and over again, to lie down and die. And the way it ended deserves to be told, because it was Goku and Vegeta together, at the very end, who brought the dynasty down. Cooler, in that final unknown form, was a nightmare beyond anything Goku had memories for, a thing of cold metal and colder cruelty that had studied the Golden Child's every move and built itself specifically to beat him. And for a while, it did. It pulled Goku apart, countered everything, drove him to his knees. But what Cooler had studied was a warrior who fought from memory, who relied on knowing the future, and that warrior was gone now. In his place was something Cooler had not accounted for. A Saiyan who had learned, in this very war, to fight blind. Goku stopped trying to predict and simply started to feel, the way Vegeta always had, and the two of them, the legend and the prince, hit the dynasty from both sides at once, faster than even a god of the Empire could track. There was a final clash, a wall of golden light against the cold heart of the Empire, and when it faded, the dynasty was ash, and two exhausted Saiyans stood in the silence where the most powerful family in the universe used to be. Vegeta did not thank him. Vegeta would never thank him. But he gave Goku a single short nod, warrior to warrior, equal to equal, and from a man like Vegeta, that nod was worth more than 1,000 words from anyone else. And the galaxy did not celebrate. It panicked, because here is the thing that Goku, for all his knowledge, had not fully thought through. When you remove the tyrant who held everything together through fear, you do not get peace. You do not get freedom and flowers and a grateful universe. You get 1,000 smaller monsters all rushing at once to fill the empty throne. Worlds that had been held in check for generations suddenly had no leash and no master and no reason to behave. Warlords rose. Old grudges reignited. The careful, terrible, brutal order that the Empire had imposed across the stars cracked completely apart, and the pieces began to move in ways that not even Goku could predict, because none of this had ever happened before in any timeline. He had not simply changed the story anymore. He had thrown the entire book up into the air, and now the pages were coming down everywhere at once, out of order, on fire, and nobody, not even the boy who remembered the future, had the faintest idea where they would land. And Goku felt the weight of that settle onto his shoulders because he understood, better than anyone, that this was his doing, not Frieza's, not the cold dynasty's, his. He had pulled the keystone out of the universe, and now the whole structure was groaning and shifting and threatening to come down, and every warlord who rose to butcher a world that had once been protected, however cruelly, by the Empire, was a death that traced back, in some small way, to his choices. This is the burden that no one ever talks about when they imagine being the hero who topples the evil Empire. The morning after, the vacuum, the 1,000 smaller cruelties that rush in to fill the space where one great cruelty used to be. Goku had spent 2 lifetimes learning that saving people is the whole point, and now he was forced to learn its hardest corollary, that sometimes, when you tear down a monster, you have to be ready to stand in the rubble and hold back everything that comes crawling out from underneath it. He had wanted to free the galaxy. And he was discovering that freeing it and saving it were not the same thing at all, and that the second one might be a far longer, far lonelier war than the first. He had thought that killing the Emperor was the end of the story. He was beginning to understand that it might only have been the end of the beginning, and all of that chaos. All of those world-ending energy spikes from a war that had torn an empire to pieces. It rang out across the cosmos like an enormous bell, and it reached a place that sits very, very far above the squabbles of mortals and emperors and dying dynasties. On a distant and quiet world, in a long and ancient sleep that had lasted longer than civilizations, something stirred. A god. Purple-skinned, cat-like, older than entire galaxies. A being whose single divine purpose is not creation, not protection, but destruction. Beerus. He did not wake all the way, not yet. But beside him, his tall and graceful attendant, a being named Wiz, took quiet note of something strange. A disturbance, far away. A ripple in the order of things. And at the very center of it, a single Saiyan who fought, somehow, impossibly, as though he had already lived these battles once before. Wiz tilted his head and considered it and remarked, almost to himself, that there was something wrong with that one's timeline. And a god, for the first time in a very long time, opened one eye. Now, I want you to understand exactly how dangerous that small moment truly is, because it is the seed of everything that comes after this story. Beerus is not a villain. He is something far more frightening than a villain. He is a force of nature with a will and an appetite, a being whose entire purpose is to keep the universe in balance by destroying whatever grows too large, too strange, or too wrong. Whole planets have ended because Beerus was in a bad mood, or because his food was not to his liking. And here was a disturbance, unlike anything he had felt in eons. Not just a strong mortal, the universe makes those all the time. Something stranger. A wrongness woven into the fabric of time itself, centered on a single small Saiyan who fought like he was remembering battles that had not happened yet. To a being whose job is to erase the things that do not belong, that is not curiosity, that is a target. Wiz, ever calm, ever patient, simply filed the disturbance away and noted that they should, perhaps, go and have a look the next time his lordship was awake and fed and in a reasonable temper. There was no hurry. There never is, for beings who measure time in the lives of stars. But the gaze of a god had turned, slowly, inevitably, toward Goku, and once a god of destruction has noticed you, he does not simply forget, but hold that thought, tuck it away. Because before the gods come knocking on his door, Goku finally did the one thing he had been protecting and saving and dreaming of since the very beginning of this entire story. He went home. Or, rather, he went to the place that was always supposed to become home. He gathered the survivors of his shattered race, this little band who had followed a child through the death of a world and a war that swallowed an empire, and he brought them, at long last, to the safe harbor he had kept the fighting away from all this time. The one planet he had refused to drag the war down upon. A small, blue, quiet, peaceful world. Earth. And for the survivors, for the few dozen Saiyans who had followed a baby out of the fire of their dying world and across a war that ate an empire, this was the end of a journey that had lasted their entire lives. They came down out of the sky onto a green and gentle planet, a world with blue oceans and soft weather and no emperor in the sky, and for the first time since planet Vegeta burned, they were somewhere they could simply stop. Stop running. Stop fighting. Stop bracing for the next disaster. Jine, who had carried her grief across the stars, who had buried a husband and a son and a homeworld, stood on that quiet green hillside and watched the rescued children, now growing up, play in grass under a kind sun, and something in her finally, after all these years, eased. They had made it. Not all of them. Never all of them. But some. A people who were supposed to be erased entirely from the universe were here, alive, planting roots in new soil. And that, however small, however bought in blood, was a kind of miracle. It was everything Goku had been fighting for since the day he was born, remembering the future. A place for the last of his people to simply live. And this is where the story goes soft and strange and quietly heartbreaking. Because Goku set his feet down on the soil of Earth, the planet he loved more than anywhere else in all of existence, the home of every friend he had ever made in his first long life. And not one single person there knew who he was. Picture it with me, because it is one of the most bittersweet things in this whole saga. He walks among the people of Earth, and there is a brilliant young woman with blue hair, sharp-tongued and fearless and endlessly curious about everything in the universe. Bulma, his oldest, dearest friend. The first human he ever met, in another life, and she looks straight through him, because to her he is a stranger. There is a short, kind, bald young monk, a boy who in another life would have become his very best friend in all the world, who would have stood beside him in a dozen impossible battles and died for him more than once. Krillin, a stranger. There is the old martial arts master, and the whole bright world he knew and loved, every face he had spent a lifetime growing old beside. All of it here, all of it real, and all of it completely, utterly unaware that the strange young Saiyan standing quietly among them remembers loving every single one of them. There is a hole in this world, shaped exactly like Goku, and he is the only person alive who can see it. And he did not announce himself. That is the part that gets me. He could have walked up to Bulma and told her that in another life, they were the oldest of friends, that she helped him gather magic orbs as a child, that she built him machines and patched him up and grew old alongside him. He could have. But what would that even mean to her? She would have looked at him like he was mad. So instead, Goku just watched, quietly, from the edges. He watched a young Bulma argue with a shopkeeper, fearless and brilliant and exactly herself, and he had to turn away so no one would see his face. He watched a young Krillin training at a faraway temple, a kid with no idea that somewhere out there walked the best friend he was supposed to have. Goku moved through the world he loved like a ghost in his own life, surrounded by everyone he had ever cared about, and unable to say a single word about any of it. And here is the quiet, brave thing he decided, standing in the middle of all that loneliness. He decided he was glad that they were safe. Glad that they had grown up without the wars and the deaths and the grief that his old friends had carried. Glad that this Krillin had never had to die, that this Bulma had never had to watch her friends fall. They did not know him. They never would, not the way they once had. But they were alive, and they were happy, and they were free. And for a hero who measured his whole life by who he could and could not save, that was a strange and bittersweet kind of victory all its own. The friends he lost in another life were here, living new ones, and they would never know what they had escaped. He would carry that for them, quietly, alone, the way he carried everything. And then, just when you think the ache cannot get any deeper, it gets worse, because Earth had a secret. A secret that Goku, in all his careful planning, had completely forgotten to be afraid of. Because in the life that Goku remembered, Earth had its own monsters, its own threats, its own villains, and the hero who had risen up and defeated every single one of them, as a boy, one after another, was Goku himself. The trouble is that Goku never existed here. That boy grew up a Saiyan, a galaxy away, fighting a different war, which means that every monster he was supposed to stop on Earth was never stopped. There was an army, a vast and secret organization of soldiers and scientists called the Red Ribbon Army, that a young Goku had once torn apart almost single-handedly. Here, with no Goku to stop them, it had been left to grow for years, unchecked, swelling in the shadows. And in the deepest, darkest laboratory of that army, a brilliant and bitter old scientist was quietly building things that should never, ever be built. Machines wearing the shape of men. And buried somewhere else on that peaceful, unsuspecting world, sealed away in a prison and simply waiting, was an ancient and monstrous king of demons, an evil that a young Goku had, in another life, been the one to stop. None of it had been stopped here. None of it. It was all still there, loaded, waiting. A planet full of buried landmines, with no one who knew where a single one of them was hidden. So sit with the cruel, perfect symmetry of that for just a moment, because it is the whole tragedy of this story folded into one quiet, devastating idea. Goku spent his entire life, every battle, every sacrifice, every drop of blood, keeping the War of the Stars away from this one precious planet. He protected Earth from Frieza, from the Cold Dynasty, from the whole burning chaos of the Empire. And in doing so, he never once realized that Earth was already rigged to blow from the inside, by enemies that only grew strong in the dark precisely because he was not here to stop them. He guarded it from the entire universe. And in guarding it, he left it completely defenseless against itself. Power, even now, was not the problem. Any one of those threats was something a golden Super Saiyan could swat aside in an afternoon. The danger was that he did not know which fuse was already burning, and that he could not, no matter how strong he became, be everywhere at once. The same tragedy, the same lesson, the same heartbreak. Now waiting for him on the one piece of ground he had given everything to protect. And the worst part, the part that kept him awake under Earth's unfamiliar moon, was that he could not even use his memory to find the fuses. Because his memory was of a world where these threats had appeared in a certain order, triggered by certain events, stopped by a certain boy at certain times. None of that applied anymore. He did not know when the machines in that hidden laboratory would be finished. He did not know what would wake the sealed Demon King, or when, or who would be foolish enough to do it. In his old life, he had faced these threats one at a time, with warning, with friends at his side who had trained for years to meet them. Here, they could come all at once, with no warning at all, against a planet that had no defenders because it had never needed to grow any. The Z Fighters, the great protectors of Earth that he remembered, the friends who had stood between this world and the end of everything 100 times over, did not exist. There was no one. Just farmers, and scientists, and a young woman with blue hair who had no idea what she was capable of, and a kid at a temple who had never thrown a serious punch. An entire planet of people who had been kept safe for so long that they had never learned to save themselves, and one Saiyan, strong enough to move planets, who could not be in two places at once. Standing guard over a powder keg in the dark, listening for the hiss of a fuse he could not see. And then came the moment that changes absolutely everything about who this Goku is, and who he is going to have to become. He reached, the way he always had, the way he had 10,000 times before, into his memory, looking for what comes next, the next great threat, the shape of the road ahead, the future. And for the very first time in his entire second life, he reached, and there was nothing there, nothing. Because he had changed too much. The future he remembered, that vast and detailed map he had carried in his head since the day he was born under a dying sky, was built entirely on a world where he grew up on Earth, where Frieza came years later, where 1,000 small things happened in one precise and particular order, and he had erased all of it, burned it down to make something new. The map in his head, the answer key he had leaned on his entire life, the thing that made him a kind of god among men, had finally, completely, run out of pages. He did not know what came next. Nobody did. For the very first time, Goku was standing in a future that not even he had ever seen, and that is the exact moment the gods arrived. Beerus and Whis descended out of the sky onto that little blue planet, and the very air itself seemed to hold its breath. But understand this, because it is important. They had not come for a fight. Goku, even now, even as strong as he had become, even golden, was nowhere near the power of a god of destruction, and he knew it, and they knew it. They had come for something far stranger than a battle. They had come because of what he was. A mortal. A single, ordinary mortal, carrying inside his small frame the complete memories of a future that never happened. Of lives he had already lived and finished. Of an entire timeline that had been wiped clean out of existence. And to a being like Beerus, who watches over the balance and the order of reality itself, that is not merely unusual. It is a crack in the foundation of the world. An impossible thing, standing on two legs, looking right back at him with ancient and knowing eyes. And for a moment, a long and silent and terrible moment, the future of everything hung in the balance. Because a god of destruction does exactly what the name says. When Beerus finds something that should not exist, something that threatens the order and the balance of reality, his answer is simple, and it is final. He erases it. And here was a mortal who broke the rules of time itself, who carried a dead future inside his living head, who had already rewritten the history of an entire universe through sheer stubborn will. By every measure a god of destruction is built to judge by, Goku was exactly the kind of anomaly that is meant to be wiped away. Wiz watched, calm and curious, as he always is, and said nothing, because Wiz already understood that this moment would decide the fate of this whole timeline. And Beerus looked at the small Saiyan, and Goku looked back at the god, and Goku did not run, and he did not beg, and he did not pretend to be anything other than what he was. He simply stood there, on the home he had crossed 2 lifetimes to protect, and let the god see all of it. And maybe that was the thing that saved him. Not his power, which was nothing next to a god, but his honesty. The fact that this strange, broken, impossible mortal did not flinch from being seen. Beerus, who had watched countless beings grovel and lie and scheme in the face of their own destruction, found himself looking at one who simply told the truth. And gods, it turns out, are not so different from the rest of us. They are curious. They are bored, and they have a weakness for something they have never seen before. And so, for the very first time, the secret that Goku had carried completely and utterly alone since the day he was reborn, the secret he had only ever spoken aloud once to a dying brother, was laid bare in front of someone who could actually fully understand it. And standing there, in front of a god, on the home he had loved and lost and found again full of strangers, Goku finally told the whole truth, out loud, all of it. He told them that he had died once, an old man at the end of a long life, that he had been given everything back, every memory, every power, every regret, poured into the body of a newborn on a doomed world, that he had used all of it, every scrap of knowledge and every ounce of strength, to save who he could, that he had buried a planet, lost his father, lost his brother, twice, toppled an emperor and a dynasty, and rewritten the entire history of the universe. And that now, after every bit of it, even he, the boy who knew everything, did not know how the story ended anymore. And the god listened. That, in itself, was extraordinary, because beings come before Beerus to plead, to bargain, to scream, to lie. They do not, as a rule, simply tell him the truth of the strangest thing he has ever encountered, calmly, completely, holding nothing back. Wiz translated the weight of it in a single quiet glance at his master, because Wiz understood what he was hearing. This was not a story about power. Every story Beerus had ever been told was, in the end, about power. This was a story about a soul that had been handed the one thing every living being secretly dreams of, a second chance with all the answers, and had spent every ounce of it not on conquest, not on glory, but on trying and failing and trying again to save people. A god of destruction had come down expecting to find an abomination to erase. Instead, he found a child who had used a stolen future to love a doomed world as hard as he possibly could. And even a god, it turns out, does not quite know what to do with something like that. And here is the thing. Here is the turn that this entire saga has secretly been building toward. He was not afraid when he said it. He was not broken. He was not crushed under the weight of it. Because somewhere in the middle of admitting it all out loud, Goku realized something that set him completely free. For his whole second life, he had been chained to a future he already knew. Every victory had felt rehearsed. Every threat had been a memory he was simply waiting to relive. Even his triumphs had a hollowness to them, because some quiet part of him always whispered that he was just following a script, just walking a road that had already been walked. But that was gone now, all of it, burned away by his own choices, his own sacrifices, his own refusal to let history stay the way it was. And what was left in its place was the one single thing that the strongest fighter in the universe had been missing since the very moment he opened his eyes as a helpless baby under a red and dying sky, the unknown. A real future. A blank, open, unwritten page. And I think that is the most important thing this entire story has to say, so let me put it as plainly as I can. For 2 whole lifetimes, Goku had defined himself by what he could save, by who he could protect, who he could carry, who he could pull back from the fire. And the great tragedy of his second life was that no matter how strong he became, no matter how much he knew, he could never save everyone. He buried a planet. He buried his father. He buried his brother. He buried survivors and Namekians and strangers and friends. The list of the ones he lost was always longer than the list of the ones he kept. And a lesser hero would have been crushed under that. A lesser hero would have turned cold or bitter or given up. But Goku, standing in the ruins of everything he had changed, looked at all of it, every loss and every grave and every name, and he did not break. Because he finally understood the deal. You do not get to save everyone. Nobody does. Not even a god with the memories of the future in his head. What you get is the chance to save someone. To give a few people more time, more love, more years than they would otherwise have had. And that has to be enough, because it is all there ever is. That, in the end, is the difference between despair and hope. Despair counts the ones you lost. Hope counts the ones you saved. And Goku, for all his grief, had always been a creature of hope. So the seeds are all there now, planted and waiting in the dark. An army of machines growing in a hidden laboratory. An ancient demon king sealed and ticking somewhere beneath a peaceful world. A galaxy with no master and 1,000 rising monsters scrambling for the empty throne. A god of destruction, fully awake now and watching this one strange Saiyan with genuine, dangerous curiosity. And somewhere out there, never confirmed, never found, never laid to rest, the unanswered question of whether a certain scarred warrior truly died in the fire of planet Vegeta after all, or whether a father might still be out there somewhere among the stars. All of it, still coming. And for the very first time, Goku had no idea, none at all, what any of it would bring. He looked out at that strange, alive, unwritten world. At his mother, Jean, who had survived everything the universe had thrown at her and was still standing, still warm, still his. At the proud prince who had become, against every odd, an ally. At a whole planet full of friends he had not met yet, friendships waiting to be built all over again, from the very beginning, in a brand new way. And the boy who once knew exactly how every single story ended looked straight into a future he could not see. A future that not one being in all of creation could predict. And he did something that he had not truly honestly done since the day he died as a tired old man and woke up small and screaming under that red sky. He smiled, a real one. Wide and bright and genuinely, helplessly excited. I used to know how every story ended, he said quietly. To no one and to everyone all at once. Not anymore. And that, my friends, that is where his new legend truly begins.